Welcome to Let's Talk Philippines. I've put together a compilation of what I think are the best stories of the year. Please sit back, enjoy them all, and I can't wait to keep bringing these stories to you in 2026. Thanks everyone, and let's get into the first story.
I found her profile on an international dating site. I was looking further afield. No responses from the countless messages I'd sent to girls at home, both in my local area and across the whole country. I was getting nothing. The photos she had shared showed someone living in a world completely different from mine. The Philippines looked so vibrant and lush, and I could almost feel it. Her profile was simple, like mine. She was 28 and lived in a small town in Cebu, where she looked after her family. And like everyone else, she was looking for a better life. She didn't seem to want anything other than that, someone to settle down with. And that's exactly what I too was looking for. I sent her a message, thinking nothing more of it. I didn't think she would reply. What chance did I have? I was already 53. Her reply, though, was instantaneous. Not only that, it was enthusiastic, full of smiling emojis and little X's to indicate a kiss. That message I received was the first female attention I had since I was 47, and I liked it. We started chatting, every day without fail. The time difference meant late nights for me and early mornings for her, but it quickly became the highlight of my day and the thing I looked forward to the most. Her messages made me feel alive. She filled them with stories of what her plans were for the day. She talked about her dreams for the future and the struggles she was currently facing. She also asked me about my life. She was asking about me, and no one ever did that. She wanted to know about my life, my work, what it was like where I lived, and what my dreams were. I told her about my quiet life and my dream to meet someone, and I tried to present myself as a stable and dependable person. I felt like I was now living in this online world, and Michelle, that was her name, was living there with me, kind of like we were in a bubble. We moved from the dating site to a messaging app. That felt like a huge step, and then she agreed to video call with me. I felt like a kid going on his first date, and the first time she called me, seeing her face on my screen, it felt like a miracle. My heart was pounding fast. She was even more beautiful than her pictures indicated, and she called me sweetheart and my love on that first video call. I was excited to think that the feelings I was having for her were reciprocated. I spoke clumsily at first, too nervous and shy. I wanted to come across as being confident and suave, but I felt like I was failing. She didn't seem to mind, and not long after, I'm starting to settle down and feel comfortable enough to loosen up. As the day goes by, she started showing more about her family's difficulties. I felt awful to think about them having to struggle. There always seemed to be some bills that needed to be paid, a medical bill for her mother, repairs needed on their small house, and her younger siblings needed school supplies. I wish I would have known that these requests were part of the playbook, used similarly by other girls on their marks. These statements were woven into conversations about how much she loved me and her dreams of us being together one day. They weren't demands, not explicitly. They were statements of fact about the challenging reality she faced on a daily basis. When I didn't offer up help, she'd follow up with a shy question. "Can you possibly help me, my love? Just a little." The thought of her, this girl that I loved, and who loved me, struggling was hard to bear. I responded instinctively. I had a decent amount of savings, for me, and I wasn't extravagant, and I thought what was money compared to alleviating the worries of the girl who was falling in love with me. I started sending her money when she needed it. $50 here, $100 there, $300, followed by $500 and $1,000. Every time the money arrived, she would be grateful. She would go to collect it at a little shop in her town, and she was so thankful and she renewed her talks of love for me and her hopes that one day we could build a life together. I felt proud I was helping her and making her life better. She talked about needing to finish her studies. She never had enough money to do that before, and she even talked about maybe opening a small business. It all sounded so exciting, but these future plans always seemed to require a bit of money. All her dreams involved needing money, and I was happy to provide. I envisaged a life with her, relaxing at home while she's out chasing her dreams that I was able to fund. I wasn't just sending her money. I felt like I was investing in the future life that we would have together, and it was exciting to think about. Over the next 6 months, the transfers I sent became routine. I would send money, often twice a month, and it started to add up. I didn't keep a precise tab of how much I sent in total, not wanting to think of it transactionally. It wasn't transactional, it was love, support, and building the foundation of both of our futures. But it impacted my savings considerably. I started to cut back elsewhere. I would buy less groceries. I cancelled some of my subscriptions, and I even postponed much needed car repairs. But nothing felt like it mattered because it was for Michelle, and Michelle was my future. I had dreamed of going to visit her, and we talked about it constantly. She said she was excited and admitted to even being a bit nervous. I saw it as the culmination of our online romance. It would be the moment our two worlds would finally meet. I booked a 2-week trip. I used most of my remaining vacation days, and I sent off for a passport, the first time I ever had one. I sent her extra money for travel expenses so that she could meet me at the airport. I just felt it was right to contribute and help her out. When I thought about the fact I would be actually seeing her in person, I became a nervous wreck. The long flight was long, incredibly long, and tiring, having to change planes twice on the way. I rehearsed the conversations I would have with her in my head, and I couldn't stop thinking about our first embrace and what it would be like to actually see her for real in the flesh. She was there, at the airport, waiting for me. She had a sign with my name on it, but I knew it was her straight away. The airport was so busy. Thousands of people all checking into flights to destinations around the world, and thousands more having just landed. My heart skipped a beat when I saw her. She looked exactly like her photos, yet different. Smaller, perhaps, more guarded. I walked towards her with a huge smile on my face, my arms opening for the embrace I'd dreamed of, but it never came. She gave me a small, polite smile back, smiling that was all was expected of her, not an indication of her feelings. She gave me a very quick kiss on the cheek, and then immediately she started talking about getting a taxi. Our meeting was nothing short of an anticlimax, but I was there with her, and I was excited to get to know her in person over the course of the next 2 weeks. The taxi ride to the hotel was chaotic. It didn't seem to be a long way, but the stop-start of the Manila traffic meant it took a long time to get there. She sat beside me, pointing out some of the landmarks, but she never held my hand like I was expecting her to. I thought we'd be close, like we were online, but this felt different. There were moments of silence that felt awkward, the exact opposite of the easy flow of conversation we had. I tried to start conversation, asking her how her trip was to meet me. I talked about my flight and how happy I was to be there. She answered politely, but only briefly and without any sense of enthusiasm. We arrived at the hotel. I was happy to be there and to be able to unload my luggage in the room. I handed them my passport and they gave me the key, and I smiled at Michelle, but that's when she asked where her key was. I'd booked us a room to share together, but she said she wanted a room of her own until we got to know each other. I thought we already knew each other, but that look on her face implied I needed to pay for another room for her, which I did, reluctantly. Luckily, it was the room next door, so we would be close. But my first hour or so in the Philippines was nothing short of an anticlimax. The next 2 weeks were very challenging. While we spent time together, going to malls and restaurants and other places, she never seemed to open up or relax. It was like she was just following the motions until I left. She never showed me any sense of excitement or happiness. I saw her world, and her financial realities were very different from my comfortable existence. That deepened my sympathy for her and made me understand why she needed my help so much. I hoped she would lighten up and turn back into the girl I was video calling for so long. I longed for that, but I didn't know if it would ever happen. The physical and emotional intimacy that I'd craved weren't there at all. We didn't hold hands naturally, and when she did hug me, it felt so forced and fake. There were no lingering glances that you make, no stolen kisses when no one was looking, and we continued to sleep in separate hotel rooms. I'm still having strong feelings for her, happy to be there on the one hand, but on the other, quite disappointed that she seems not to share the enthusiasm that I feel. I tried talking to her about it in a gentler way as I could. "Is everything okay, my love? You seem a little quiet." But she'd brush it off. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm just tired." And then she said it was different, telling me seeing me made it feel real. I desperately clung to that last explanation. Yes, it felt real, very real. Maybe the transition from online fantasy to real-world presence was awkward for her. It was awkward for me, but I was enjoying it. I don't know what her true feelings were. Maybe she was shy, or nervous, or just overwhelmed. I rationalized away the lack of affection, telling myself that this deep, true love didn't need a constant physical display. After all, she was here with me, and she was showing me her life. Surely that was love. I always convinced myself that any negative thoughts I had were just that, thoughts. I continued to spend freely during the trip. It felt like I was reinforcing my commitment, showing her that I was a good provider. I gave her money to send to her family, bought her new clothes and shoes and a phone, and I treated her to some very nice meals. I wanted her to know that I was there for her and would be there for her when she needed it. The day I left was so difficult. I cried, and tears welled in her eyes as we said goodbye at the airport. She hugged me so much tighter than she had for the entire trip and told me, "Come back soon, my love," she said. "I will miss you so much." That hug and those words were what I clung to on the plane journey home. They felt real and special. They also erased the awkwardness of the past 2 weeks. All I thought about now was the image of the crying girl who didn't want me to leave. She did love me after all, and I convinced myself that the struggles during the visit were just bumps in the road, and they could be overcome by the strength of our connection and the love we felt for each other. Returning to my quiet apartment was like stepping back into a world I didn't really want to be in anymore. The loneliness was amplified now. It was a stark contrast to where I had just been, and I started to live in my own mind in a way I never did before. Daydreaming and using my imagination to think about the things I wanted to be doing and the people I wanted to be with. Our online communication resumed. It felt like it had been intensified by the visit. She talked about how much she missed me and what a good time she had with me. She reiterated her love and her desire for our future together, and the requests for money continued to come in thick and fast. She framed them differently now. They were for our future. Money for her to finish a short course that would get her a better job. Money to help her family move to a slightly better house, which, she said, I would eventually share. Money for investments that would lead to a secure financial position for her. Each request felt more justified, and it felt connected to the potential life we could have together. I returned to my routine. Work, quiet evenings, and sending her money. The amounts grew larger. It was a gradual progression. $500 for tuition, $1,000 for house repairs, several hundred for unexpected medical bills that seemed to strike her family with alarming frequency. I opened a spreadsheet for the first time, finally, just to track the transfers. The money grew steadily, crossing 5 figures, then creeping towards $15,000, $20,000 over the year that followed my first visit. My savings dwindled. I took on extra freelance work, ate even more simply, and postponed dental work I needed. Friends who occasionally checked in noted I seemed thinner and more preoccupied. I just talked vaguely about future plans, an investment I was making. I couldn't explain Michelle to them. How could I articulate this relationship that existed primarily through a screen, powered by the hope of financial transfers? How could I articulate this relationship that existed primarily through a screen and through the financial transfers I sent? There were still video calls and sweet messages and declarations of love, but sometimes I'd see a flicker of something in her eye on the video. It was like she was distracted, and there was always a hesitation, and it often disconnected at odd times. Doubt would sometimes creep in, and did I just not understand things properly? Was I being foolish? But I always pushed the doubts away. She did love me, and she needed me, and we had a future to look forward to. The sheer amount I had invested, both emotionally and financially, made it almost impossible to consider the alternative. She was a part of my world now, whether I liked it or not. After more than a year of this routine, sending money, receiving nice love messages, and planning a future that I felt perpetually just out of reach, I decided I had to go back to the Philippines. Not just to visit this time, maybe I could stay for a bit longer, see if we could truly build a life there. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to see her face when I showed up. I wanted it to be unannounced and unexpected, and I wanted to see her smile. It felt like a romantic gesture, and it would prove my devotion, and perhaps that would break through the last barrier that I'd felt during the last visit. I knew it was going to be hard. During all our conversations and her requests for money, she often sent pictures or showed me a video call of her town in Cebu, her house and where that was, and I thought I would have a good chance of finding her. I knew where she collected the money from that I sent, and as a last resort, I could send her some and wait for her to show up at the shop. I booked the flight, and I kept it a secret from her. I sent her a message saying I had a busy work schedule coming up, and I wouldn't be able to chat for as much as a couple of weeks. It felt very deceitful, but it was necessary for my surprise. I packed the bags, and it was exciting, and this would determine the course of the rest of my life and hers. The journey felt different this time. There wasn't as much anticipation, more like a knot of anxiety building in my stomach. When I landed in Manila, the familiar heat, it never feels normal. Going back to a hotel for a night before returning to the airport the following day to fly to Cebu. I was expecting a small little town, but what greeted me was anything but that. I went to a hotel and started to panic. How was I going to find her here? I brought up all her pictures, and it was impossible. My only hope was sending her money and meeting her when she arrived to collect it. I asked a taxi driver to take me to the town, only to be told it was 50 kilometers away. I didn't know what that meant. Was that 1 mile or 1,000 miles? But when he quoted the price, I guessed it was somewhere in between, and it was only $70, so I jumped in the taxi. As the taxi navigated the busy streets, my heart was hammering against my ribs. The scenery became more rural and rustic. What would her reaction be? Would it be joy or shock? And would she even be there? We arrived, and I paid the driver, and he left, and it was only a small town, not bustling like where we came from. I found a hotel and got a room, and I sent her a message saying I'd sent her $250 that she could collect. I'll be going back offline, and I will speak later. Then I closed the laptop. I walked to the street and wondered how to find the shop. I started asking people, and before long I was directed to where it was. I sent her money online that she could pick up in cash, a very famous company that facilitates those transfers. That was a blessing, the only thing I could use to find her. I took a deep breath when I saw it. It was next to a bank and opposite from a small restaurant, so I went in there and I waited some more. 4 hours later, I see a girl that resembles her walking into the shop. I quickly pay the bill and stand up and cross the street. She walked out 10 minutes later with an easy smile on her face. She looked up, and the look on her face changed from happiness to shock and what seemed like horror. I went in to hug her, saying surprise, but she pushed me away. I asked her how she was, but it seemed like there was nowhere she'd rather less be than right there. A man walked over. I had noticed him sitting on a motorbike parked just down the street. He looked visibly angry and called out to me, "Don't touch my wife." She was stood there frozen. The man's expression shifted from anger to surprise and confusion. "Who is this, Michelle?" he asked. His voice was firm and it was laced with Tagalog I didn't understand. Michelle was still frozen, her eyes darting between me and him. The colour in her face completely drained. Before anyone said anything, I spoke. I came to surprise you." The grand romantic gesture shattering right in front of my eyes. The man looked at me and then back at Michelle, his eyebrows raised in question. She finally spoke, her voice trembling, saying that he is my friend from online. Before he had a chance to speak, I blurted out, "A friend? After all the my love and sweetheart and all the money I sent you?" The man's gaze sharpened as he looked at me, as though he was assessing the situation. He said something to Michelle in Tagalog, his tone low and serious. She responded quickly and defensively. I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the dynamic. This was her and her husband, and in what world had I just found myself in? I repeated it again. "A friend?" My voice was starting to shake. "Michelle, we'd been together for 2 years. You call me your love, and I've sent you." I had to stop myself. The money. It suddenly felt obscene to mention it in front of him, in front of both of them. Did he not know that she'd been to collect my money just now? The man looked away from my face, looking distraught, to Michelle's, who was looking terrified and guilty. He said a few more sharp words to her, and she flinched. Then he turned to me. His English was broken, with a heavy accent, but the meaning was brutally clear. "You are the one?" He gestured vaguely, then pointed between himself and Maria. "She is my wife." He had just said it again, and I couldn't unhear it. Everything clicked into place. The guardedness during the first visit, the separate hotel rooms, and the lack of intimacy, the constant need for money, the carefully curated online persona, it all was false. It wasn't shyness or cultural difference. It was a lie. And it was a long lie, a 2-year elaborate lie. And it felt cruel. I looked at Michelle. Her eyes were pleading. They were sort of filled with a mixture of shame and fear. Fear of me and of him and of this entire fragile deception. "You have a husband," I whispered. The sound barely left my lips. And she didn't answer it directly. The tears were welling in her eyes, and she just looked away. The man stepped slightly in front of her, like a barrier. He just said, "Go." His voice was firm. "She is my wife. Go now." My mind reeled. I couldn't believe the betrayal. It was absolute, and it was devastating. All the plans, the hope, the sacrifice, and the vast sums of money, it was all built on nothing, on a huge foundation of lies. There felt like nothing left to say, no explanation she could offer, no apologies that could mend this. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. Love, future, it was just a transaction. I was the mark, and she had played me perfectly. I took a step back. My legs felt weak, and I looked at her one last time, trying to reconcile the woman I saw, pale, tearful, and just standing behind her husband. That radiant, loving face I had spent countless hours talking to on my screen, I couldn't do it anymore. They were two different people. "I need to go," I mumbled, and I turned away blindly. I turned around and walked away as quickly as I could. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. Away from her, and from him, and from the shattered dreams. I walked back to the hotel room and sat on the edge of the bed, and I just stared into nothing. The sadness I had felt after that first visit felt gentle compared to this. I pulled out my phone. Her picture was still there, on my screen. Her last messages. I looked at all of them, and the words just started to turn hollow. It almost felt like they were mocking me. I scrolled through our chat history, the I love yous and future plans, interspersed with the requests for money, for her mother, school, the house. Each dollar represented a lie. The spreadsheet I decided to open it, and the total stared back at me. It wasn't just a lot, it was everything I had. It was more than $20,000, and it was all gone, and it was spent on a lie. Money I had earned through the years of quiet work, that I'd saved for my own future, for retirement and security, it was gone. Just like that. As I sat there, the realization started to kick in. What was I going to do now? I knew it was over between me and Michelle, and there was no point me even being in the Philippines. I didn't stay the night in that hotel. I got transport back to the main town in Cebu, and I got a hotel there. I cried almost all the way back, and when I got there, I opened up the laptop and hoped there would be a message from Michelle, maybe explaining everything off as being a big misunderstanding. But there wasn't. She'd blocked me. I just stayed in the room all day and night, and for the next 3 days, I didn't go anywhere or do anything, or even eat. Trying to think back to the messages, was there anything to indicate that she was lying? There didn't seem to be. It all seemed real, but it wasn't. When I left the hotel for the first time in days, the sun hit me. It was bright out, and I looked around at the strange surroundings. It still had an awful feeling in the pit of my stomach. I wanted Michelle. I knew it was over, and I resigned myself to that. And when I went for a walk, I felt a calm come over me. At least I've been released from this money-sending nightmare. It was all meant to be part of our life together, our future together. That's how she always sold it. But it wasn't true. At least moving forwards, all the money I had could be spent on me. I looked around, and there were hundreds, if not thousands of girls that looked like Michelle. All beautiful, petite, and each of them a different person with their own dreams and hopes. Perhaps it would have been better meeting someone in the Philippines. I wouldn't have done the same things or made the same mistakes. The following day, I flew back to Manila. I changed my flight and flew home, back to my apartment, and I'm looking around my apartment, remembering the conversations I had with Michelle. I would have my laptop on my knee, sitting on the sofa, and we'd be chatting. My laptop on the kitchen table while I cooked. I remembered all the conversations and it hurt. But I got over it. It took a long time, but I have healed. But it was a devastating life experience. Over $20,000 gone. I won't see it again. But it's not just the money. It's the thought that I will never find the love that I crave. What do I have now? What do I have to do? If only I knew.
It's a great feeling when you're on the way to the Philippines. A feeling I'd experienced 5 times prior to this one, but this time was different because I was moving there permanently as a brand new retired expat. It's something that I dreamed about for as long as I could remember. Well, at least the past 10 years from that very first trip when I fell in love with the country. I considered myself to know all the positives and the negatives of everything that happened in the Philippines. I had a few friends who had been there and done that. I took comfort from the fact I could learn from their mistakes. Now, however, I'm struggling to pick up the pieces of my broken life. That might sound drastic or overly dramatic, but it's exactly how I feel. I wouldn't want anybody to go through what I did, not even my worst enemy. And I respect all the guys who say what happened to them, even though we know people are going to say nasty things to us. We do it anyway in the hope it's going to help at least one person to not do the same things,
and make the same mistakes. Now, before I go any further, I would like to say there's only one person to blame for the unhappy ending in this story, and it's the guy typing this right now. This is my fault, and my fault alone, and I take full responsibility for that. When you get to the airport in Manila, after doing it a few times, you already know the ropes. And while you're excited to be there, you don't want to get too excited too soon, just in case the queue you'll find yourself in at immigration is a mile long. You have to be prepared for that. Yet on this time, the queue was quieter than I'd ever experienced it before, and I hoped that would be a good sign of things to come. I had to go to the place where I always stayed in Manila, just for memory's sake, and that's the Holiday Inn in Makati. For me, it's a great location, right in the thick of all the action, and for the price, it's a good hotel. That's where I was going to spend the next week, just getting used to this new retired life that I had now. I was 62, ready to settle down and enjoy life. Halfway through 2022, which I suppose means is just how amazing how fast things can come crashing down. But at the time, I had $380,000 in investments at home, which I knew should be enough for me to live a retired life in the Philippines. You've got those essentials that you have to pay for, health insurance, so that does take a big hit out of your budget. Then you've got accommodation and anything else that you want to add on top. I knew that was an okay budget, so it wasn't really a concern. I was not thinking about trying to find someone. I wanted to remain single. You might meet someone from time to time, but the thought of getting into a serious relationship was the furthest thing from my mind. I'd seen the odd person leave the Philippines due to having been involved with a Filipina. I didn't want to be that guy. Over my previous times in the country, I'd been everywhere. Not everywhere, but a lot of places. Everyone goes to Manila. Usually that's where you're going to find yourself landing, especially after a long-haul flight. Then there's Angeles, about an hour north, which I liked in moderation. I think that's the best way to talk about Angeles City. A couple of days for a wild party and then I've had enough. Bohol was always my favourite island, and I'd seen a few guys build houses there. I think one of them is still there. The other three, I have no idea what happened to them. So based on those 4 guys, 1/4 of a success rate, 25%, that could be a good indication. But I wasn't considering building a house in Bohol. Starting a life there though, that sounded great. There were places I hadn't yet been in the Philippines, so as part of a treat to myself for finally being able to retire, I had a month where I planned to visit a few of the places I'd never been before. Not only to have a good time and see more of the country that I loved so much, but also to see if any of these places I actually liked more than Bohol, which would be great for my retirement. I guess you could say it was me doing that small tour that put me in the position that jeopardized my retirement. But that wasn't thinking anything like that when I flew from Manila down to Davao on Mindanao. I'd heard lots of things about Mindanao, some positives, and again some negatives, and some parts of the island were meant to be quite dangerous, but I wasn't going anywhere close to there. Mindanao didn't do much for me. I had a good time across the 2 days I spent there, but it wasn't somewhere I ever thought I would return. Nothing really wrong with it, they were just places that I preferred a lot more, so I didn't see much point spending more than a few days there. Next, I went to Dumaguete. Never made it there before, and that gave me more of the feelings I was looking for. Again, I spent a few days there, looking around and taking in the sights and sounds. I liked it, but I did prefer Bohol and Cebu. After spending a little bit of time there, I decided to just stop the tour. I obviously knew where I liked the most, so there was no point going and looking anymore, really. Initially, I went back to Manila. Part of me wished I was going to be living there, but I thought that my budget would stretch a lot further on one of the islands. The only real negative I found, and I didn't like, was that when you're in Manila and you want to go to Bohol, you can't just get on a bus or a train for a 3 or 4 hours ride and get there. You've got to fly, and that's one of the things about the Philippines that is quite difficult for me. With it being an island nation, there's an awful lot of flying involved to get to different places, but that's just how it is. But it didn't mean it was my favourite part. I spent about a week in Manila. I did look at a few available rentals just to see what there was. I was as close to 100% sure that I wouldn't be living in Manila and I would live in Bohol, but I thought it would be good to look at what places there were available on the ground. I spent lots of time, like everyone does, looking at real estate websites of just what's available, but to see in person what you were getting, that was good. BGC had some amazing places you could live. A small place I could probably fit within my budget, but everything that was more typical to what people at home were used to living in terms of sizes, the prices start to go up considerably. It was tempting, though, to live in BGC. If I did that, it might have been a better idea, but you can never go back and change things. I did go to Cebu before I went to Bohol, but after a week there, I did get the ferry to my favourite place. I don't know what it is about certain places that attract certain people. I don't know why I liked that place so much, but as soon as I got there, I immediately felt like I was home. I love the coastal road that goes around a bit of the island, yet it still feels like it's a long way for it to go to the next level of improvement that we see on Cebu, for example. I was thinking 5 or 10 years we're going to see a lot of development here, and that would just be at the right time for my retirement to be able to experience this. That excited me. You don't have to go too far out of Tagbilaran city, maybe 3 or 4 miles, and you've got amazing houses right next to the ocean. By amazing, it's not like a modern luxury house you would find in a similar location in the US. Here, normal people seem to live in these beautiful locations, great conditions right overlooking the ocean, and it was something like that I was hoping to rent. But when I got there, I wasn't going to just look for somewhere to rent straight away. I wanted to kick back and enjoy the retired life before putting down some firmer roots. Part of me was glad that I went to look at a few different places, just so I knew that I was making the right decision by basing myself in Bohol. I spent a week in my favourite beach resort to the northeast of the island. I think that's as much detail as I want to give. It wasn't a 5-star luxury resort, it was more like how I felt things would have been a long time ago, and I was just the sort of guy where I came from in the US that was rural, and that's where I felt most comfortable. In a similar setting, and that was almost perfect. A great week, just relaxing and planning and dreaming about what the next years would bring. You can't beat much about the Philippines. I mean the ocean and the beaches and the opportunities to just soak in nature in an environment that is not full of many tourists. Yet the beaches and oceans that you're experiencing are far better than the vast majority of places that most tourists go. In certain parts of the Philippines, you really do feel like you're discovering something that not many people have discovered. I get it, there are guys living in Bohol at the moment who are probably thinking that I'm talking nonsense. But if you really think and dig down into it, it's just how it felt for me. Bohol was the perfect location for someone seeking a retirement in paradise, yet without all the trappings of modernity and luxury living to go along with it. But if you'd wanted that, you could have it. What I'm trying to say is, I loved the state of development in Bohol, yet I could see, over time, things could only improve and get better and better. After spending that great week not doing much of anything, I moved to a hotel in the city. To call it a city is a bit inaccurate because it's only small, especially when you compare it to Cebu City, for example. It is more intimate and peaceful, I find. I'm not trying to advise anyone to go and visit themselves, I'm just giving you my own feelings, and I really loved it, and I think that's apparent. I took the hotel day by day and kept going, looking for somewhere perfect to rent. In an ideal world, I would have wanted beach views, a small yard, and that was it really. Didn't want much more than that. But I didn't want to pay more than $400 a month. You have to always bear in mind, at least in my case, that my insurance premiums were very high. That was the most expensive thing I paid for. If I did it like some guys and don't bother with insurance, I could have had a house a lot better, but that's not something I would ever have considered doing. Eventually, I found a place to rent. It was perfect. The only thing I needed to do was buy a car so I could get there easily, because it wasn't easy to get there via public transportation. I mean, they had buses occasionally, but at 62, retired, I wanted the nice life. I didn't want to do anything like that, so I bought myself a small car. I didn't spend a lot on it, but I did have to withdraw about $10,000 from my investments. Just a drop in the ocean. Shouldn't cause much difference, I thought. The place I rented was actually on part of the island that I never usually spent much time in. It was quite off the beaten track and not on the tourist path. The house was quite basic, but I was allowed to add some things to it to make it more like home. I spent a few $1,000s doing that, put in a cheap but nice bathroom and a small kitchen, but I thought I'm going to be living there for a very long time, so if I spend $3,000, which is how much I spend, across the course of 3 years, that's an extra $100 a month. So that was my reasoning behind it. Don't get me wrong, you can find good places to rent in the Philippines that have everything you already want installed. But at least from my experience, not only are they a lot more expensive, they might not be in the exact area you want them to be. You might be in a community with similar houses, or you might be in a condominium building. If you want an actual house out of the way of things, then I couldn't find any houses anywhere close to my budget with the conditions that I actually wanted. So it was a bit of a compromise that I had to spend that money. I do think it's important that I point that out, just to say why I chose the place I did. Moving in, though, was great. I wasn't expecting it to be the last place I lived, but I expected to be there for a good 3, 4, or even 5 years. So far, my retirement is moving exactly in the direction I wanted it to go down. I was never someone who spent a lot of time speaking to other expats, although from time to time, there was a certain restaurant that you might go to that served your type of food. You'd go there and you'd have a bit of a gossip with some of the people who lived there as well, but most of the time I just kept myself to myself. I love the little shops you get in the Philippines, the ones that are 100% local, where you could go and get a couple of beers and a bag of ice and go and sit on the beach. You needed to find a tree to sit under because, some of the beaches there was nothing there, so the sun is quite strong. But the peace, the tranquility of being in your favourite part of the world and nobody else is there, nobody else understands just how good it is. That's what I liked. But it was when I was on a beach with a few bottles of Red Horse. Unfortunately this time, they didn't have any ice in the shop and the fridge wasn't working, so they were quite warm, but that was a compromise that I had to accept on quite a lot of my previous vacations. I did learn when I was living there to buy everything and keep everything in the refrigerator at home and make my own ice, and that tended to work for me, but that day I did go to the shop. I want to describe it in a way so that you can picture it, but you don't know which beach it was. How do I say that? Let's just say it was not a very popular beach, and it wasn't as beautiful as some of the other beaches. It was just one of those local area sort of deals that you get in the Philippines at a place like that. But I'm sitting down and I'm reading, and I can't remember what book it was, and I've tried to think for a while and I can't remember, but that doesn't really matter. All of a sudden, though, I hear a "Hi, how are you?" I look up and a Filipina girl is saying hi to me. I say hi back, "How are you too? I'm great." The usual things you say when you're speaking to someone. As I've already mentioned, I was 62 at the time, but I didn't look like I was 62. I bet I could have passed for at least 5 or 6 years younger. I still had a full head of hair, I wasn't overweight, and I tried to keep myself as healthy as I could. She introduced herself to me, she asked me what I was doing, I lifted up my book and just said I'm reading, with a few beers, enjoying my retirement. What are you doing? She just talked about how she was going for a walk, but she lived very close by. She pointed in the direction where you could see a few houses and she said, "That's where I live." She then looked at my book and said, "Oh, I've read that before." Wish I knew which book it was, but I don't know whether she actually did or she was just trying to make conversation. But I said to her, "It's great." And there's a long silence and I'm not saying anything, and I think she's thinking of something to say. I think she saw I only had a small amount of my last beer left. I only took 2 small bottles of Red Horse, so it's not like she called me at the most opportune moment, but she said, "You fancy another one? I know a great little place not far away." I thought she was being kind and nice. I didn't have anything better to do, so that sounded like a good idea to me. Let's make a friend. I was going to be here for a long time after all. So we walk in the direction she signalled, and I pointed out my car parked not far away. The place I was living was 25-minute drive away, and I sort of said to her, "I've got my car so I can only have one more." And she laughed and said, "You're in the Philippines, don't worry about it." You'll hear that all the time in the Philippines. They've got a lot more relaxed attitude to drinking and driving, and as much as I know I could have done that, I was never the sort of person who would ever dream of doing that, even if I knew I could get away with it. I wasn't about to get drunk and get behind the wheel of my car, at least now. I said I'll have one, I'm not going to drink and drive, just smiling, and she laughs at me and says, I know you're not from the Philippines if you do like that. If I did that, would I look like a Filipino? I jokingly said to her. You know what I mean, she said, and then we just continued walking. I didn't say anything until we got to this little place. I wouldn't call it a bar, it was more of a small shop like the one I mentioned before, with a few tables outside it. There was some guy sitting on one of the tables, so friendly people in the Philippines, and they say hi, and I just sit down and get into a conversation with this lady I'd just met. I found out she was 45 years old. She didn't look anywhere close to 45. I always felt if you saw a Filipina, if she took care of herself and didn't eat all the oily food and all the processed food that many of them do, they do seem to age quite well. Yet you do occasionally see Filipinas who will look a lot older than they are. You can see that that's the type of thing they eat, really heavy old cooking oil and bad quality processed meats. I tried to avoid that, and it seemed she did as well. The fact that she was 45 may put many guys off, but it was because she was 45 that I thought I was safe from anything nefarious that could happen at some point in the future. Not that I was thinking anything would happen at all. It was just nice to have a conversation with a local. I was asking her questions about what was it like to come from there. What's it like going to school at a place like this? What's it like being so close to the ocean? Beautiful beaches. I wanted to know all about it. I'd chosen to move there because I loved it so much, yet C was from there, and that fascinated me. She was called Nicole, and I was enjoying getting to know her. I didn't know why she said hi to me. Maybe she was just being nice. Maybe she saw me there a few times and wanted to see what I was doing. But whatever it was good to see her. I had a beer, and I was about to leave back to the car, and she said, "No, have another one." And she passed me a Red Horse, and against my better judgment, I had another one, and then another one as well, and then 2 or 3 after that. I was really enjoying being in her company, but I wasn't in a fit state to drive home anymore. She was laughing at me saying, "No problem, you can drive. I'll drive you if you want." I don't know why I said okay. She had a few drinks as well, but I had a few before, I suppose, but I thought, yeah, go on, you can drive me home. So we walked to my car, I jump into the passenger seat, and she's behind the wheel. I never thought to ask if she had a license or if she had ever driven a car before, but if I had to guess, I would say she didn't have a license and maybe had never driven a car, maybe once or twice. But luckily the roads were quite quiet. I love the roads throughout Bohol. Little narrow roads, palm trees and jungles on either side, and then you see little houses like dotted around. It's really, really beautiful, just my type of place. And we're joking with each other when she's driving the car because she's going maybe 15 miles an hour. And we finally get to my house. I just get out of the car. I was about to walk around to the other side because the window was open. I should mention that the air conditioning in the car wasn't working, but I didn't mind. It actually made me feel a big connection to where we were because I was driving around with the window open. But I'm walking around to the other side of the car about to say goodbye in the window, and she gets out. "Got any beers in the fridge?" she asked me. That wasn't something I was expecting, but it just so happened that I did. And I said, "Would you like to have a beer?" "I would," she said. And she sits on the chair next to the little table in the yard. As I said, the house I rented was just what I was looking for, not too close to any other houses, quite laid-back setting off the main track. Very peaceful. Unfortunately, I didn't have sea views, but the sea wasn't too far away. But you could go to the sea, although it wasn't as beautiful as some of the other beaches on the island, but it was nice to go and sit there occasionally, which I did. So I walk inside, and the first thing you find out is the power's off. You just hoped it hasn't been off for long. You open the refrigerator, and the beers are still reasonably cool. Not as cold as you'd like them, but power cuts were just one of the things I had to get used to, especially at the place I was renting. But it added to the excitement of it, I found. So I take 2 beers and open them and go and sit next to her outside, and we just start talking. That was when she told me that she'd seen me on the beach quite a few times before, and she'd always wondered what I was doing. She said I looked really interesting and she wanted to speak to me and see if she could get to know me. Then she told me she used to be in a relationship with a guy from America, and he was living with her in Manila actually. She thought that they were serious. They lived together for a few years, and one day, he just left. After she told me that, she said before she was with him, she was married to a Filipino a long time ago and had 2 kids. Both the kids are now grown, and her ex-husband unfortunately passed away. You won't believe how, but that was in a road accident. I didn't ask if he was drunk when he had the crash. We finished a beer each, and I go back to the refrigerator and get another each. And she's just so incredibly easy to talk to. She talked about her kids. Both of them were living in Manila. Apparently they'd been to university and were working okay jobs. Nothing amazing, but they were working to a level that they could at least live a reasonable life, which many people couldn't. Then she starts talking about how she was lonely. She just lived in her house by herself. Part of me is having a really good time. But it wasn't ever my idea to meet someone or have a partner. I wanted to stay by myself. I thought that would be the best thing for me to do. But I was prepared to see where things went with Nicole. I couldn't see anything about her that would indicate she had any bad intentions. I just thought she was a nice person who had seen me on the beach a few times and came to say hi. The fact that we got on well with each other, that was a bonus. We finished the second beer, and then we had another one, and the nearest shop was about 10 minutes away, and after the beers ran out, I will admit to getting behind the wheel of the car and going to the shop to get some more beers. I promised myself I wouldn't, but I did, and I'll admit that I did. Luckily, the power wasn't off in the shop, so the beers were really nice and cold. You always have to cherish a cold beer in certain parts of the Philippines, because you can't always guarantee that you're going to find one at the right temperature. If you're sitting in a bar in Makati and you're hearing this, then you might not be able to understand. Try going to one of the islands and then out of the main area, and then you'll understand just how important cold beer is. I drive back to the house, and on the way back I'm thinking, I just left the house with all my things in it with her there. So I drove a bit faster to get back, but she was still there, sat outside. I don't know what to make of anything, but I want to take advantage of any opportunity that comes my way. And just because I had this chance encounter, I didn't think anything could go wrong. Things go wrong very quickly though if you're not careful. We had some more beers, a few each, and it's approaching mid-evening and the sun's starting to set, and she looks up and thinks, I better go home now. At that point, I wasn't in a suitable state to drive, and she definitely wasn't, and then she just starts laughing and says, would it be okay if I stayed here for the night? I'll go back home tomorrow. By all means, I said. I only had 1 bedroom, but I had a sofa, so you can sleep on that. We continued talking about my life, what I used to do, about her life and what she used to do. And I'm reassuring myself that she's 45 years old. It's not like she's 25 years old. The typical age, I suppose, you hear happening in all the stories, all the horror stories. I just felt I was lucky meeting this lady. She was great. A few more drinks later and a lot of talking later, and I'm starting to get tired, and looks like she is, so we go into the house. I get her to some blankets and she starts lying on the sofa and I go to bed. A few hours later, she wakes me up and you probably know what that means. And then in the morning, I'm really struggling to understand just what happened. You don't just meet people, go and say hi, go for a drink and then spend the night with them, but obviously you do, or she did. It was quite an awkward conversation in the morning. We start just joking and laughing with each other and she said, can you drive me home now? So we go into the car and I drive back to her house and pull up outside and she says, would you like to come in and have a look? I'd love to show you around. So we went inside and she showed me around her house. That's the beauty of being retired though. You can just do what you want when you want to do it. Not like I had to be anywhere or do anything, so I always wanted to take advantage of opportunities that came my way. Her house also wasn't too close to other houses in the area, but you could see the beach from her house. When I've talked to my friends about this, now I'm not there anymore, they always sort of say she must have been dripping in money if she's got a house on the beach. But I don't think many people can understand that in the Philippines, they've got so many islands, so many beaches, that it's not a very special thing. But she could see from her house to the beach and to the tree where I was sitting before. I hadn't asked her what she did for work yet. I told her I was retired, and she offered me a glass of water and we sat down. I wasn't ready for another beer yet, but I asked her, what do you do for work? She just said at the moment she wasn't working, but her kids sent her a bit of money, and that was enough for her. She said that the house she was living in, apart from her time in Manila, was always her family home. She then talked about how her parents unfortunately had passed away, her 2 siblings had left the island for a better life somewhere else, so she was left with the house. She did upgrade it into its current state, but that was a long time ago. It always made me think, people leaving such a beautiful location in search of a better life. It makes you think that I was there for a better life myself, yet the locals wanted to escape there for something else. When you think about it that way, it makes you understand the different situations people are in around the world. I was interested to know what she did all day. She just said not much. She talked about how she liked to read, which is what I like to do as well. She would like to go on walks, but only in the evenings when the sun had already started to go down. She said she didn't really like swimming very much, which I thought was quite funny, being in a location with some of the most clear seas in the world. But you would go and meet up with friends and just gossip for a few hours, just to kill the time, she said. But it was quite a unique situation, being that all her close family weren't there anymore. She did say that she had cousins that lived in the vicinity, but not too close by. I thought that was quite a strange situation in the Philippines. I've heard of instances where you go to a place where someone's from and there are hundreds of family members around, so this felt quite unique. But after sitting there for an hour just chatting, I told her I better go, and she grabbed my phone and put her number in it and said, "Call me now." So I did, and then she had my number. I can remember driving back home thinking what a strange experience that was, but what a wonderful experience it was as well. Deep down, the idea of having a partner was something that I longed for, but I felt like it was too big of a risk, so that's why I wasn't interested. But what could go wrong with a relationship like this? I'm thinking like this and I'm not even in a relationship with her, and I don't know if I'm ever going to see her again. The thoughts that run through your mind, I guess you can only call them funny. I get back home and just do some reading, and it was probably 5 or 6 p.m, and then my phone starts ringing, and it's Nicole. "It was so nice meeting you," she said. "How are you? What are you doing at the moment?" When I tell her and ask her what she's doing, she just said I'm about to go and meet up with some friends, and then just go back to the house, have a bit of a chat. That's what people tended to do there. But after, I've got nothing else to do, so if you want to come around, bring a few more drinks with you, you're more than welcome. I wanted to go and see her again, of course I did, but part of me didn't want to because I didn't want to ruin what I had. But the opportunity was too good to be missed, so I said, "I'll be there in 2 hours." She said, "Make it 3. That would be about 10 p.m. I said, "Okay, got nothing else to do, see you then." I finished the book I was reading, went to the shop, bought some more Red Horse, and drove to her house. I want you to picture her house. It's not like some of the houses in the Philippines that are basic shacks made out of tin and scraps of wood. This was a proper structure. It wasn't an amazing house, but it was slightly above many of the houses that you see in villages around. When I get there, she hears the car pulling up and runs outside and, "Let me help you with those," she says, and she puts them in the fridge. Then she starts giving me a hug. It was at that moment that I just said to myself, just go with it. If it goes somewhere good, if it doesn't, never mind, take it as it comes. So I loosened up a lot and we just spoke for hours and hours and she invited me to stay over, which I did. One negative was there was no air conditioning in that house and I did prefer AC, but I was getting used to sleeping without AC when the power kept going off. From then on, we never really spent time apart. I mean, we did, but only a few hours. I was at her house or she was at mine, and we just ended up together. This was before the end of 2022, and things were moving really quickly and unexpectedly. We never seemed to have arguments, we never seemed to have problems with each other. It was just like we were two people living in that part of the Philippines, spending a lot of time alone, and we just found each other. That's how it felt, and before long, we were talking about moving in and living somewhere permanently together. After a lot of careful thought, we decided that I would move into her house. I would have to write off everything I'd spent on the other house, but that's just one of those things. $3,000. Never mind, it is what it is. But I moved into her house, and when I did move in, I'm really thinking that this is actually happening. I know so many guys go to the Philippines because their main hope is to meet someone. That wasn't even part of my idea behind moving to the Philippines. It kind of just happened, and here I am, living in Nicole's house. I fell for Nicole, and it made me feel like I was in my 20s again. She was everything that I'd ever wanted in a partner, yet everything that I thought I would never be able to find. But it was happening, and we seemed to go great together. After a month, I was starting to struggle without air conditioning, and without all the things that I really wanted to use living long term. So, I had to put some more money into her house. I bought 2 AC units, one for the bedroom and one for the main room. I spent a bit on a kitchen, as I did on the last place, and also a bathroom. Mainly a renovation, but I had to spend $6,000 doing that, which had to come out of my investments. But it didn't feel like a lot to be able to live there comfortably. The problem now is I'm feeling like I can't live without her, and the thought of living without her would ruin my time in the Philippines. Exactly the feelings I was trying so hard to avoid. Then my car completely died. Went to try and get it fixed and spent about $1,000 on it. Quite a few spare parts were needed, and it was never right again. Could never get the AC working, and it got to the point where I just had to get rid of it. I don't have to buy another one, so it was a bit of annoyance. But I still had enough money coming in to live, even though most of it was going for my insurance payments. But I was in the Philippines for a quiet, easy life. But my life wasn't really quiet and easy anymore, because I now had someone that I was living with that I had to please. We had to do things together because we were in a relationship, and that's what you do. I never told Nicole my financial situation, yet. I just told her I was retired and I had a small income to live on, and that's all I said. I didn't say, I've got X amount of this or X amount of that, and she never asked. She wasn't trying to find out anything about my financial situation. It just seemed like she wanted company, and she was getting company from me. I lived this life for 6 months, and I'm really happy, and retirement's great, and I'm just getting in enough money to be able to continue living like this. Maybe we could save a little bit for 3 months and go on a trip somewhere. And I saved over 6 months, enough to go somewhere. And I asked if she'd like to go to Manila for a week with me. Of course she would, she said. So we went to Manila and stayed in the very same hotel I stayed in Makati that I always loved. It was great getting to see a different part of the Philippines with her. Kind of made things real, not just connected to that little part of Bohol where she was from. When we were in Manila, she said she wanted to go and meet up with her kids because she hadn't seen them for a long time. That was great. I was happy to do that. So, we went to see them. She said they were earning a salary that for the Philippines was quite good. For people like her, she said. I didn't like it when she said people like her, as though other people were different in some way. I never saw it like that. But we met her eldest at his place. That wasn't much to write home about, a very small room he was renting, just saying he was saving up because he wanted to buy himself a condo soon, and he wanted the deposit for it. Her youngest, her daughter, she came to meet us there, and I took them all out for a nice meal. The kids, they were great. Then they left, we went back to the hotel, and went for a drink in a bar not far away. I think I was at the peak of my happiness, because everything seemed to be perfect. We left Manila, back to Bohol, back to the house, and back to that life that I loved so much. I might have only been back for about 2 or 3 weeks, and she's speaking on the phone with one of her kids, I think her son, and when she puts the phone down, she's got a bit of a serious look on her face, but I wasn't ready for what she said next. Do you know my son? He's hoping to buy a condo and he needs a deposit to be able to buy it. He's managed to save up over the past 3 years about 100,000 pesos, so he needs another 200,000, and he can't get it on his own. He wants his own place and he's saving and saving, and he's never going to get there. Then she said, I really wish I had the money to give it to him. I feel so bad I can't help my son. I don't for the life of me know why I said to her, don't worry about it, I'll give you the money for the deposit. The words sort of came out of my mouth without me even understanding that it was happening. And before I could say, I'll have to move some things around and maybe sell something, it might take 6 months, which I wanted to say after I realized what I said, she just smiled incredibly wide and said, thank you so much. You will be so happy. Damn. I'd committed to it. I don't know why. I just said it. I don't know why I did. I didn't mean to. It was as if it was an instinctive reaction to try to make her feel better without understanding what the consequences of that would be. It wasn't a fortune. $3,000. Just under. But it was $3,000 that I didn't have to give to her. But I tried to forget about it and I'd already committed to it. What could I do? Be careful next time. Don't do it again. But then her daughter gets upset because she wants to get her place. She's been saving for a long time as well. She's only got 30,000 pesos. And I had no choice but to do the same for her daughter as well. All in about $5,000. Just like that. Gone. Bear in mind, I had just enough invested for me to rent somewhere, pay for my insurance, and have a peaceful existence. And I've already spent money on the old house that I had to write off, her house, and now I've spent another $5,000. plus the problem with the car, and the fact that I would probably need to get another one, even though I had tried to convince myself I didn't need one. That's probably going to be at least another 5,000. All that added up to about 10% of my investments. So not a big percentage, but it was still an amount that reduced my income by 10%. I tried to forget about all those as being one-off expenses. She didn't ask me to give the money for her son, I offered it. It didn't appear that she had any indication that she expected me to do that, but I just offered it, so it was my own fault. But I promised myself I wouldn't do it again. At this point, we're in 2023. Had a great new year with her. Just me and her sat on the beach by ourselves, listening to the ocean. It was amazing, and the longer I stayed with her, the more in love with her I became. Around February time, I'd forgotten about those little money problems that had happened, and I'm just enjoying myself with her. But by this time, I had already bought another car, because without it, it's no fun. Days were everything I thought they would be in retirement. I wasn't able to spend a lot of money. I couldn't go to restaurants often, but that's not what I was wanting to do. I was happy to be in this perfect location with Nicole. But I did find now I was fully supporting her financially. When I said I hadn't done anything else stupid since, a month or so ago from this point, I told her kids not to send money to their mom anymore. It was only $100 from each of them, but that was still $200. I just said, don't worry about it, I'll look after her now. And then as soon as I said that, I'm thinking, as much as I wanted to do that because I loved her, I can't really afford to do that, so I got to the point where I'm still able to live on the money that's coming in, but it is a very big struggle. March 2023. The worst month of my life. My investments plummeted in value by about 22%. I should have held on. I'd have been fine if I did, but I panic sold. I was never an investor. I'd just taken advice from a financial advisor, and I happened to be heavily invested in things weighted towards banking stocks. But with all those failures, and then all of a sudden, your investments go down by 22%. You've got to picture it like this. I had $380,000. By the time I'd done quite a few silly things I shouldn't have done, I was probably down to $340,000. I'd held these investments since retirement, and while they went up a bit and down a bit, they were around break even. But I was under the impression this was meant to be a stable situation, so I'd spent $40,000 out of it. And then over the course of a few days, $340,000 all of a sudden becomes something around $260,000. And I will admit, I did panic sell. I sold everything. I'd never been in a situation like that in my life, so getting rid of all the investments and having the cash in the bank. That sent me into a depression. Nicole could tell something was wrong, and I had to tell her about my investments and how much I had, how they went down in value, and now my income might not be enough for me to live in the Philippines. Nicole was very supportive, telling me not to worry about it, saying we have each other, we'll be fine. You don't have to pay rent here, she said. It's not that expensive to live here. Just don't worry about it, we'll be fine. But it's different when you're a foreigner, isn't it? I had to make sure my visa was always in place. That meant going on trips when necessary to do that. That was an expense that I had that she didn't. Health insurance, that was very important. That was an expense I had and she didn't have, but maybe she should have. But it wouldn't have been as expensive for her. These were non-negotiable things that I needed to pay for. But she was really supportive of me. She always was. It took me a few weeks to try to convince myself, you've still got $260,000, you're 63 years old, going on 64. Am I really going to live 260 months more if I spend $1,000 a month? Am I going to get to 84? But I didn't like how uncertain things were. Things only got worse. And I honestly believe that Nicole only had mine and her best intentions at heart when she said, why don't we try and open a business? Initially, I was dead set against the idea. But she said, we don't need to use all the money, but we could open a small business, maybe a shop and a little bar on the beach, something like that. If we only make an extra $200 or $300 a month, I mean, that's going to go a long way. But no, initially I didn't like the idea. But a month later, I found myself transferring in $80,000. We bought a small plot of land, built a bar on it with a little shop. It was only local, stocked it out, and I actually bought a bike as well, and a few improvements on the house that were essential that needed doing. But we now had this little business, all set up a few months later. We had someone who was working for us there, and I will agree it was making money. Maybe $20 or $30 a month, maybe. After you take into consideration the person we had to pay, the bills, when the electric was working. So, yeah, that wasn't a sensible thing to do. The biggest problem was, that I was now in love with Nicole, and I didn't want to not be with her. So that's what made it worse. What would have happened if I never met her? I don't know. But I asked her if we could get married because I wanted to have that connection with her, and she was really happy and agreed to. So a month later, after spending more money, jumping through all the hoops necessary to get married, we got married. And as much as I was happy about that, I still had these awful feelings like, why did I sell those investments? Why did we build that shop? Why did we do this? Why did I do everything? But again, I just tried to convince myself it's going to be fine. I probably had $170,000 left. It's difficult to come to terms with that, yet still I tried to convince myself, don't do anything else, don't do anything else, you've got 170 months at $1,000 a month, so just relax, get married to her, she's obviously a real person who loves you. I wasn't doubting that, I wasn't thinking she was ever trying to scam me or do something like that, but in 170 months' time, I don't have any money left. I'm going to be close to 80, so she's probably going to look after me, even if it means I'm going to be in a very bad condition. So that made me miserable, and I was starting to get upset, and Nicole could tell. You then start to think, what are the options? I can't get a job, especially in the Philippines. I could go back home and try to get a job, but what about Nicole? Could I take Nicole with me back to America? And throughout all this time, Nicole is just telling me not to worry about it. And then we start having little arguments because I'm worrying about it, and her mentality was just so different to mine. She's saying, I've got nothing and I'm okay. You've got that money in the bank. If you spend $1,000 a month for the next 5 years, you're still going to have more than 100,000. And you're going to have more because during those 5 years, you would have been receiving interest on that money. I could get 4%, I think, at the time on the money, but it wouldn't be enough to live on without the money going down. But the money wouldn't go down as quick. My mentality, though, was just, I felt uncomfortable if my money would continue to go down, even though the years of my life were also going down as well, which is obvious for everyone. But people are like they are. I tried to think like she thought and just get on with life, and over the next few months, I was slowly coming to terms with this new reality. And it really wasn't that bad if you think about it. But at the time, as much as I was trying to be okay with it, I wasn't. I was feeling so bad, and I wanted to feel better. My only idea of what to do would be to go away for a while with Nicole, somewhere different, and try to take stock on things. And in that case, for some reason, you don't mind spending $5,000 for a month in a really nice resort, thinking you're getting your head straight, only to return back to Bohol and be in a worse position than before. Why do we do these things to ourselves? I'll never know, but over the next 6 months, my extreme fear of my financial situation drove me and Nicole apart. I think that's why my story is different, because if I look back now, I blame myself for what happened. I was being really argumentative, always complaining about things, every time I had to use money for anything, because I knew I wasn't getting more money in. I was getting interest, but it wasn't enough to cover anything that needed covering. We were in a really big argument, and I did something that I have never done before, and I will never do again, and I regret more than anything. But I hit her, and she fell over and stood up, really upset with a bleeding lip. "What's wrong with you?" she said. That was the lowest I'd ever been. I hated myself because of that, and it was my own financial stupidity that caused it, not her. And that's the thing how I think my story is different, because I drove us apart. When if I had been sensible, I could have lasted until I was over 80, and I know she was the type of person who would have looked after me. She would have done. But whatever it was about me, whether I was stubborn or what it was, I turned into this monster that I didn't recognize anymore. I couldn't believe I did that. I told her how sorry I was, and when she'd calmed down and I'd calmed down, I was just thinking about how uncomfortable I was because of the situation I was in. I wish I'd listened to her and not worried about it, but it wasn't in my nature to do that. I told her I'm sorry, but I can't stay here anymore. I need to go back home and fix things. I gave her a little bit of money, and now she was upset. But she was really upset. But I had to go, and I did. She didn't want me to go. I could tell she didn't, and I didn't want to go. But I did. I just flew home. I rented a place, I got another job, and I regret coming back because I probably could have made it work if I was brave enough. I miss Nicole every day, but I haven't tried to call her. She doesn't know my number here. I know hers, but I'm too worried to call her. We are still married. But I thought I knew what I was doing when I went there. But it just goes to show retirement in paradise isn't for everyone. As much as I thought I knew what I was doing and thought I was being careful, I wasn't prepared for the visceral reality of living somewhere like that, while my money was going down with nothing to top it up. Did I do some stupid things? Yes, like building that little bar and shop and buying the land. Part of me is glad I did because I gave it to her and that's something that she's got. Because she didn't really do anything wrong to me. It was me who did that to her. And I wanted to share my story just to say it's not always the fault of the Filipina for the decline of a relationship. I blame myself 100%, and I can't believe I had a great girl and I broke up with her. Friends tell me I did the right thing. We've heard so many stories, and there are going to be so many more cases of guys going there and losing everything. And it was because I was so paranoid about not losing everything that I lost her instead. But then again, I have to take solace from the fact that if all my money did run out, maybe she would have changed. Because we've heard it time and time again. When the money runs out, the girl changes and it's not the same anymore. So it was either I break it off now and try to build up my money again a little bit, or she breaks it off with me when the money runs out. You can't win, can you? And that's what I want to say at the end. Whatever you do, you can't win. If you're in the Philippines like I was, number one, make sure you have enough income so you don't have to watch your money go down. If you do meet someone and start a relationship, be open and honest about what your position is. Let her know things you're prepared to do and things you're not prepared to do, and it's a non-negotiable. And make sure you find someone who is reasonably close to your age and maturity. I think that's the main thing. But I failed, and I still think about Nicole every single day, hoping to one day see her again. I thought I was building an empire in the Philippines. An empire might be somewhat of an exaggeration, but for me, I felt like I was on top of the world when I moved there for an early retirement when I was only 54 years old. I had slightly over $1 million. It was invested for an income, which was an amazing income for the Philippines. It was my plan to go there and just live the retired life. But after I was there for only 3 months, I was getting bored and I was in need of a project to keep me occupied. I'd been going to the Philippines for as long as I could remember. I tried to get there every single year for the past 25 years before my retirement, and I felt like I knew everything that I needed to know about the country. I hadn't yet found someone who I wanted to be serious with, but it wasn't without trying. I knew the perfect woman would be out there. It was just a question of being patient and waiting for the right moment. Throughout all my vacations to the Philippines, I'd been all over the country. Every time I went back, I would spend time in Manila and go somewhere that I'd never been before. I developed some favourite places over the years. As much as I loved everything about the Philippines and all the places I went to, there was nowhere quite like Manila. And that's where I planned to spend my retirement, with occasional visits to other places. I was from a very small town back in the States, and ever since I could leave home and start my own life, I was drawn to big cities. I spent a lot of my working life in New York. Although it wasn't really my favourite city, it was purely a work-related thing. I preferred other cities in the country, but if I was able to make good money, I was prepared to live wherever I needed to. I think that's why I loved Manila so much, because I loved everything about the big city feel it gave you. It came with negatives that all big cities have. Bad traffic, hectic feelings, feeling like you're stressed all the time. But I loved the feeling of always being on it, as opposed to being relaxed and thinking, what am I going to do next? 3 months of living in Manila, I was already looking for something to do. The problem was, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I never guessed I would meet someone so soon, though, after arriving in the Philippines. I joined a dating site, and I was always open to going on casual dates, and I'd been on a lot throughout the whole 3 months that I'd been there, but they never really amounted to anything. But when I was on a date with this woman, I felt a connection. She worked in a call center, answering customer service related inquiries from people back in the States. It was a reasonable job, and it didn't pay her a lot of money though, and she had to work US hours. If you've ever called a customer service hotline in the States, lots of them will have people just like her working in the Philippines, and these are the sort of people you're going to be speaking to. She was a great person. She seemed to be driven, and she had lots of ambitions, just like I had. She was 22, and that was considerably younger than I was, but I wasn't hesitant as much as I thought I would have been. I used to just go on dates with people who were over 30, but the problem with that was, especially in the Philippines, every single woman I met who I was casually dating with, over the age of 28, every single one of them already seemed to have kids. I'd never met a woman in the Philippines, at least one that I was interested in, and one who was interested in me, who didn't have kids. So while I was looking for someone who was probably at least 10 years older than this woman was, I thought, well, let's have a fresh start together, because she didn't have kids. Therefore, no commitments, and I thought to myself that it's probably the best thing for me to do. When I called my son and told him that I met someone and she's actually younger than you, I could hear him sigh as if to say, here we go. But I didn't care, and life was great. I was living in BGC. She was living a long way away in Quezon City. On a good day, it would take almost an hour for her to get to me and for me to get to her. That's why I guess we rushed into things and we started to move in with each other not that long after. We didn't rush things too quickly though, like you hear in some stories that some guys do. She wasn't living with me within 2 weeks, but after dating for 3 months, that's when we decided to take things further. The place where she worked wasn't that close to where she lived either. She used to go on a jeepney every day to get to and from work, and I often asked her why she chose to live where she did. Something about her friends being close by, and because she wasn't from Manila, she felt more comfortable living close to people she knew and trusted. That made sense. It would have been about the same time for her to get to work from my place in BGC. So after 3 months, we decided it was the next best step for her to move in. This was back in 2012, and I'm happily retired, and now I've got a girlfriend. I'm happy to have something to occupy me, but I'm still looking for things to do all the time. I think our relationship went very well, and after she'd lived with me for about 6 months, I was happy to take things even further, and we got married. It was when we were married that she stopped working. It only felt right because the amount of money she earned didn't really contribute much to our marriage based on what I was bringing in from my retirement income. But because she was a hard worker and she worked a respectable job, because I was looking to do something in the Philippines to keep me occupied in terms of business, we thought it would be good if we could do things together. We didn't rush. We took things as they came and started to look into different things. Where I was from in the States, although I didn't live there after I left home, even though it was a small town, and even though I had just over $1 million, just to go and buy a house, one house, all I would have been able to do was do that. Okay, there are other parts of the country that are cheaper, but it didn't seem right that you could have over $1 million and that wasn't enough for you to buy a chunk of your own country. I get you need billions and billions in order to do that. But in the Philippines, it felt like $1 million was enough to actually get a slice of it. I get that sounds crazy. But one thing kept coming back to me was the idea to try and build a portfolio of rental properties in the city. I thought about that for a long time. I really liked the idea because that's what I wanted to do back in the States. The problem in the States was it's so expensive to get even one house, and you've got all the offensive taxes that go along with property ownership in the States, which I am dead against. While there are still taxes you have to pay in the Philippines, it's not the same as it is in the States, and it's not an amount of money that you actually notice going out of the door. The reason I thought about it for such a long time was because my plan was to sell my investments in the States
and use these investments in the Philippines. I wanted something that was hands-on, that I could get involved with on a daily basis. Not only invested, and then I didn't need to do anything. I wanted to do something. It was probably something else that I could have done, but the more I thought about it, the more I kept coming back to the possibility of having this empire, which is the word I'd like to use. But that was perhaps because I was thinking bigger than what I actually had available to me. I spoke to my wife about this on more than one time, and she always thought it was a really good idea. As a foreigner, I was allowed to own a condominium unit in the Philippines, as long as it was within the 40% maximum ownership that are allocated to foreigners. Aside from a condominium, a foreigner isn't allowed to own anything else in the Philippines, most definitely not land and therefore not a house. That was something that really annoyed me, because I felt like if I could have done everything properly in my own name, things may have turned out better. I wasn't about to rush into things though, and first things first, let's just buy one condominium. I didn't really want a condominium, but it felt like it would be the most sensible thing to buy to start with. As I was living in BGC, it seemed to be the best place for us to look for this first condo. We viewed a lot of units. I was mainly interested in smaller units that could be rented out to other foreigners, and there were lots of buildings to choose from, although today there are even more. After looking round for about a month, I settled on one condominium that seemed to offer everything I was looking for. I looked at similar units for rent in the same building and how much they went for. I looked at how occupied the building was in terms of percentage. I looked at similar units for sale. And after all the research I did, it seemed like it was a good price, and we should be able to rent it out and make a return of around 6%. I was getting a bit more than that with my investments in the States, but it wasn't just about the money. It was about feeling that you're doing something and you're involved hands-on with your investments, as opposed to it being passive. I've spoken to lots of people about what happened to me, and they all look at me like passive is better, but I didn't agree. I wanted to do something. So I sold $100,000 worth of my investments and purchased that first condo. It didn't take long to find someone to move in. It was a younger foreigner who was also from the States and who was there to change his life, as he put it, and he always paid on time, and I started to feel like it was a good investment. After things went smoothly for 6 months, it only seemed logical to look for another one, and we found one that was equally as good. But I wanted to buy it, and unfortunately the foreign quota had already been filled, and the person selling the unit was from the Philippines, therefore, as a foreigner, I couldn't. I should have thought I'd look for somewhere else, but my wife said, buy it in my name, which I probably shouldn't have done, but I did. That was just under $100,000 as well, and that was rented reasonably quickly, and things seemed to be going well. It wasn't very hands-on in the sense that I needed to go and collect the rent or anything like that, and I still felt, even with these 2 condominiums to manage, I wasn't busy or as busy as I wanted to be. I wanted to do something more in-depth, build my own condominium building, but I knew that was just a pipe dream because there was no way I could have done something like that. But we came to the idea, let's just buy another condominium. This time my wife said, I already have one in my name. Why don't I go to the bank and see if we can get a loan for the other one, and then you only need to spend a bit of money, and the rent should cover the loan. We looked at it, and if we paid down 20%, although the interest rates were quite high at around 7% at the time, I thought I would happily try it. It was quite hard for my wife to be approved for a loan as she wasn't working, but we showed that she owned one condo already, she used to work and have a stable income, and the condo was going to be rented out. It was approved, so we bought this other condo, and I actually paid 25% down, and the mortgage for the rest. That went okay as well. It was rented out, although I did find out that the rent wasn't covering the mortgage, and I was out of pocket at just under $100 a month on that one. We sat down and relaxed for a few months just thinking what the next steps were. I was only interested in Manila, but my wife said, would I be interested in going to look at Leyte, where she was from? I knew nothing about that part of the Philippines. That was actually one of the places I never visited during all my vacations there, and I was happy to go. When we got married, her mother actually came to Manila. That's when I met her for the first time. But we arrived at Leyte and started looking at the possibilities there. Everything seemed to centre around her idea of building somewhere to live that could be our base. As a city person, I found it very quiet, but I did see the appeal of spending a few months a year somewhere like that. 6 months in Manila, a month by the beach, and then she must have caught me at my most generous time because after we looked around her area for a while, there was a nice piece of land for sale. The owner owned the house next door, and it was right on the beach. Actually, the beach was in view, but the road was between the house and the beach. And we actually asked how much he was selling it for. He gave us a good price, and I just thought, you know what, why don't we just buy it? I didn't even think about it, or do any due diligence, but it wasn't a lot of money, so we stayed in Leyte a bit longer, and that was put on my wife's name. I wasn't ready to build anything yet, so we went back to Manila, and I was looking for another condo. One came up in Makati, and it looked really good, and I decided that I wanted to buy it in my own name because the foreign ownership was below 40%. That turned out to be my favourite of all the condos so far, and it was getting a return of around 7%, which I thought was great. After we had that for a few months, my wife was starting to talk about the house on Leyte that we wanted to build. It would have just been for us. It wouldn't have been an investment that could have made us any money, but I was going to get older at some point, so it only seemed to make sense that perhaps when I was in my 60s or 70s, not being in a big city would be better for me. And I think that I was thinking long term when I agreed to build it. My wife wanted to be there when it was being built, so we left Manila for a long time, going back every now and then to make sure things were okay. But we were there for a whole year. The house was built, and I was starting to enjoy being there and just going to Manila occasionally. I spent $100,000 on that house, which in hindsight was way too much. I could have had something that would have been good for half the price. It was amazing to be able to have a bedroom overlooking the ocean, yet no tourists in sight. During that year, when the house was being built, we did invest about $80,000 into other plots of land, which were there for the future. With all the investments in the States, I probably had half of them remaining. It was always my intention to leave at least $250,000 invested in the States, so we still had $250,000 left for anything else that came up in the Philippines. We invested that into 2 more condos in Manila. These were both put into my wife's name. Not that it was necessary to put them in her name, but it just seemed to be like the best idea at the time. Now she owned 3 condos outright and 1 with a loan, and I owned 2 condos outright. She owns the house and all the land. The income we were bringing in for the rent was more than enough for us to have the life we'd wanted. And the $250,000 emergency was even extra income that I had. I never expected that I would have loved living in Leyte, but I really did. I never expected that I would have wanted to have been there more than Manila, but I was happy where we were. We were going to Manila every 2 months, I would say, so there was always something to do. Usually one of our condos would have been between tenants, so we always had somewhere to stay in Manila. That meant we didn't need to pay for a hotel. And I think that life is just progressing as I expected it to. Perhaps I enjoyed being in Leyte because it allowed me to do other things to keep me occupied, things that weren't available in a big city. I bought a small boat and sailed about, only close to shore and to do some fishing every now and then, but I found it a new part of my life, and I enjoyed without thinking about business and other thoughts that I wasn't having anymore. My wife, on the other hand, was still interested in doing things. She was a lot younger than me, but I tried to convince her that we didn't really need to do anything. If you want to do something, we'll do something close by to where we live. And don't worry if it doesn't make money because we don't need it to. I gave her $10,000 to try to open a business close by. She tried something, it didn't work, so I wrote off the money. It wasn't the end of the world, and at least she tried. But that failure never made her want to give up. She wanted to continue, and she just said she's happy to do it by herself, if I'm happy to let her. And I just said that's okay with me. As long as you don't ask for more money, we've got the income coming in, and that's good to pay for everything. If you don't need to use anything else, I'm happy with it. That was the first time I stayed in Leyte by myself as she went to Manila. She said she was going to investigate something for a few days, and she'd be back, and she did come back. I didn't know what she was investigating. I just left it up to her. I was over the idea of doing anything. I was happy with what we had, but she was still of that age where she wanted to do things and achieve things, so I was happy for her to go and try. She said she'd found something to do, investing in a business with one of her friends. Her friend already had a business, which was a gas station, not in central Manila, but quite close by, and said that they were going to be opening another one soon together. I asked her how she was going to do that, and she just said she'd already worked everything out. I was happy for her that she'd found something to do. It was going to involve her spending more time in Manila, so I did go with her and just let her get involved. I'm just in the hotel one day. At this point, all our condos are occupied, and she arrives back and says, "Do I want to go and look at the gas station?" That it sounded okay, so we left the hotel and got a taxi, and an hour later, that's where we are, as is her friend. I asked her, "What are you doing with the gas station? How did you invest in it? What's your part in it?" Then she said, "Oh, I used our condos as collateral for a loan, and now I own 40% of this gas station." I never thought she would have done that. I asked how much she borrowed, and she said $200,000. But she had all the paperwork to show that she was an owner of this gas station, and I just said, "I hope it works." I don't know what happened exactly, and I suppose it doesn't really matter, but it didn't work. She said it was something to do with some legal issues, something to do with another gas station that was close by, something along those lines. But that happened after her only being involved with it for less than 6 months. When you were there, it didn't appear that there were any issues, and I was starting to think, is this friend of hers actually a friend, or did they just take advantage of the fact that she had some money? But because of that, the realization that I needed to be a lot more careful with everything that I had. And I needed to be more mindful of the things that my wife would do because she just lost $200,000. Now, all the condos she owned had loans against them, and the income from those 3 weren't enough to pay the loans. It was close to being enough when they were rented out, but if 1 or 2 or all of them weren't rented out, that would be a big payment every month, which would wipe out all the other income. And that was really a big down point of my time in the Philippines and my relationship. I wasn't able to look at her in the same way anymore because she did that. I thought it was incredibly stupid. The thing is, I never would have thought she would have used the condos as collateral. If I'd have known she would have done that, I would have told her you're not allowed to. So we had a choice. Do we get rid of these condos that she had the loans against and get back and see if we can pull things together? Or do we keep them and hope that it's not going to cost us too much money? And then, when the loans are eventually paid off, she'll have them. But looking at the terms of the loans and thinking that I'm probably going to be long gone by the time they're paid off, there's no point really struggling for that fact, so we sold them. Altogether, I put in $325,000. And when they were sold, after all the fees, I got back about $5,000. I'd lost $320,000 because of what she did. Also the house we had together and the land. I didn't look at her like she was my beautiful wife anymore. The thing was that sealed the deal for me was when she kept saying, "Well, I want to try to do something else." I still had 2 condos in my name, which were both paid for, but there was no way I was going to risk anything else. She just didn't seem to understand the fact that there was no money available for her to try to do anything else, because if it didn't work, that would mean that we didn't have any income anymore. So when we made it back to Leyte, I found that we're not spending time together anymore, and she's trying to do something with no money, not understanding that making an extra $100 a month working every single day is not worth it when you've already got a couple of $1,000 coming in for not doing anything. The reason I hung on for longer was because I was the same way when I just arrived in the Philippines. The thought of not doing anything made me feel nervous and bored. It had taken finding Leyte and moving there and living such a different existence that made me understand that I didn't need to do anything and I could fill my time with hobbies as opposed to business. I did understand where she was coming from because that used to be me, but I wasn't prepared to invest more money, and because of that, the relationship got worse. She left for Manila by herself, saying she was going to look at another opportunity, but I didn't know where she was going to get any money from to invest. She just said she needed to go and look at it because that's what she thought would be the best thing for her to do. When she came back a week or so later, that was when I think I understood that our relationship was probably going to come to an end. She sat down and asked me to come and sit next to her, and she said that she wants to do more business, and if I'm not able to help her, then she doesn't think we can stay together. I couldn't believe it when she said that, because everything that we had done together, it did seem like she'd already made up her mind though, and I just had to ask her what about the house. Then she said, well, we have to share everything. I have the house, you have the condos. As much as I was devastated, I felt like there was no point fighting it, because what she had done was insane. If she continued to try to do things, then it would just get worse. One of the big problems was that I don't think she understood that she wouldn't be able to do something because there was no money available her to do anything with. I think because she had feelings that she had when we were doing things in terms of business, that she was addicted to it, and that's all she thought about, and I had to agree with her. I didn't even want to leave the house because I was so happy there. I asked her, can I just live here and you can go to Manila? She just said no. My family will come and live here. Not to mention all the land that we bought around there as well. That would have been a huge loss for me. Then I said to her, how about we stay together, we sell the land and you can use that for a business, and I will sell one of the condos and we put it together after the land sells. Thinking that maybe she'd see sense and agree to sell the land and I'll get my hands back on that money. She actually said, okay, let's go to Manila and sell the condo. I said as soon as the land sells, then we can sell a condo. So she agreed to wait for another 3 months just to see what would happen. But nobody bought any of the land. And then she said, let's sell the condo first, and I just said no chance. That was when the relationship completely broke down and I had to leave and go back to Manila. Back in BGC, in the same hotel I stayed at when I first arrived for my early retirement, I couldn't believe how far I'd fallen. All I could tell myself to make myself feel a little bit better was at least you've got some money left, and at least you got enough money to live and still continue retirement. That was true, but I didn't want to be in Manila anymore because it reminded me of all the times I had with her. No matter how much I loved it, I didn't love it as much after I found Leyte. I knew I couldn't go to Leyte if I was single, and I decided to go to Angeles City, which was a place I visited about 10 years before. I don't know if it was because it was so close to Manila and so easy to get there. I just wanted to go somewhere as quickly as I could. But as soon as I did and I decided that's where I would go, I thought I might as well stay. I'd never been to Angeles City with my wife, so I thought that it would be a separation. I'd also never really been the sort of person who liked that sort of entertainment, but I knew there was no way I would ever get into another relationship, at least a serious one. Also, Angeles City was a lot more affordable than Manila, and my money went further there, and therefore it didn't feel like I lost as much. I'm still living there today. The only thing that I did that I didn't say I would do is get into another serious relationship. I did, and I'm still in that relationship. Yet she doesn't know anything about any of my finances. She doesn't know I have $250,000 invested in the States. I am happy to report that I've actually got $340,000 invested in the States because my investments went up since then. Down, up, so I'm happy about that. She doesn't know I have those 2 condos in Manila, but they are rented out, not all the time, but more often than not, so that adds to the income. I would say I average on a good month just under $2,500. I'm more than happy with that, but I would have been even happy with double, which is what I would have been on if I didn't make the mistakes I did. If I'd left all my investments back in the States, it would be worth close to $1.5 million now, maybe even a bit more, and that would have given me over $6,000 a month. But I don't think you can look back at things and wonder too hard what would have been if I did things differently. I've seen so many people since I've been living in Angeles City come here with all the best intentions in the world, fall in love with a girl, get married, invest into something, and they're the ones who have to return home with nothing left. The fact that I still have enough to live on and live a good life, that's got to be good enough for me. Lastly, my new partner, who I've been with for quite a long time now, was 34 when we met, and I completely overlooked the fact that she had kids. Because she was at a different stage in her life, She wasn't always wanting to do things, and that made our relationship easier. I do support her kids because that's what's expected of me, but it's not making me have to change the way I live. It's not an amount of money that affects my lifestyle, and it's something that I just have to do if I want to be in this relationship. The Philippines was the country that I always went to on vacation, and the country I always wanted to retire to. It was a country I wanted to build an empire in, and I thought I was starting that with my first wife. I quickly realised that even in the Philippines, an empire with $1 million isn't going to happen, and I was happy to be living by the beach in Leyte, just enjoying life. But my wife decided that wasn't enough for her, and she wanted to continue to do things. She lost all the money, our relationship turned sour, and therefore I lost a lot of money because of it. Even after all that happened, I would probably say I wouldn't change anything. I do know now that my wife, she is still my wife, we're still married on paper. She has tried to do other things. The house, as far as I'm aware, is in a state of disrepair because it hasn't been maintained. Yet she would have been in a lot better position if she'd just done what I advised, but she didn't, and therefore she's not. I do feel fortunate to be living in the Philippines, but it does come with struggles and challenges that you're not used to facing. I would never have guessed that my wife would have used those 2 condos as collateral to do something, but that's what happened. That's what caused me to lose my money, and it's what caused my relationship to break down. Don't look at the price of things in the Philippines and think you can carve an empire out because you've got $1 million. It might be a poorer country than the States, but it's not that poor. It's a wonderful country though, and I'm going to be here forever. Just make better decisions if you want to do the same.
I had been researching retirement destinations for a few years. I had a long list of countries that I wanted to visit, but narrowing them down to a few I could actually go and visit was difficult. Things that were important to me when I could finally retire were great weather, great beaches, great beautiful locals, and affordability. Affordability was the most important, and of course safety. The countries I had on my list included Colombia, Brazil, Thailand, and the Philippines. I'd never even left the States, but I knew I couldn't afford to retire there. With the help of the internet, though, I decided to first go and visit the Philippines. This was a few years away from when I could finally retire, but I thought it was a good time to see what things were like. As soon as I arrived in the Philippines, I knew there was no point me going anywhere else. The Philippines was great. I arrived in Manila, and it was very different than what I was expecting, but it was better in almost every way. I stayed in Makati for a few days. It's a long flight from where I came from, and I think I stayed in the hotel for over a day before I was ready to actually go out. But when I did go out, it felt like I was already home. I was ready to retire now. I did the usual things you do in Makati, had meals at the filling station, drinks in the bars, and just enjoyed myself more than I had for a long time. Like many people of my age, I was divorced, and the girls in the Philippines made the girls at home feel irrelevant. I'd learned enough from my research to know that you don't meet a girl in a bar, especially a bar on P. Burgos Street, but it was fun hanging out with some of them and just seeing what the game was. So different to life back home. I narrowed down some of the places I wanted to move when I retired. Bohol was at the top of the list. Cebu was also on my list, as was Leyte. Leyte because a YouTuber I used to watch lived there with his wife and child. They had a house there, and he seemed to be living life right. But after I'd been in Manila long enough, I flew down to Cebu. That's when the Philippines just kept getting better. It felt different to Manila. Not as big, but definitely big enough. And it felt more green and picturesque. Not to mention the beaches that were there. I met up with some expats that I'd met online who swore that Cebu was the best place to live in the Philippines, saying how you couldn't go wrong. I was believing them. This place was indeed awesome, and I spent some great days there before getting on the 2-hour ferry to Bohol. There wasn't as much going on in Bohol, but if anything, I thought the beaches there were even more beautiful. I stayed at a really nice resort. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth it, and it felt like it was in the early stages of development. Roads that have since been paved weren't paved before, new shops opening, new gas stations, and I fell in love with the island. I didn't get to Leyte on that trip. I had to return home and back to work, but I left knowing that the Philippines was going to be my retirement destination. The only question was, when was I going to retire? I was 50 and had about $1 million in assets, including my house. And I think I had it in my mind that I needed a lot more than this to be able to retire. But I understood that if I moved to the Philippines, it was so much more affordable. And I came to the conclusion that I was able to retire right now. Sell my house, put everything into an index fund, and conservatively, if I got 5% a year, I'd never eat into my savings and I'd have $50,000 a year to live on. In the Philippines, that's a great income, and I could live very well for that. I knew I could because I'd been there. I was in the Philippines on vacation mode, and I still wasn't spending that amount of money. I continued to work while my house was for sale, and I was fortunate enough that I managed to sell it quickly, and I invested everything into an index fund which historically had made 7% a year on average. I don't know why I didn't think of doing that before. If I'd visited the Philippines 5 years ago, when I had less money, I could have still retired then. I could have retired 5 years ago and wouldn't have had as much income, but it would have still been more than enough to live well in the Philippines. When I told my kids I was moving to the Philippines permanently, that I'd finished work and I was retired now, they thought I was joking. I'd never talked about my interest to move or retire to a different country, but they fully supported me and wished me well. They were both at university, so I gave them $10,000 each as a bit of help in hand, and I flew back to Manila. This time, I was there for good. But I didn't stay in Manila for very long. I wanted to go back down to Cebu and Bohol. I wasn't going to rush into choosing where to live. I had no plans at this point to buy a house or build a house. I just had plans to enjoy my retirement and the fruits of all the years I had worked. I kept extending the visa over the next months, and I had decided that Bohol is where I wanted to live. I liked that it was still in the early development stage. I liked that it was a bit further away from the main action, but you could still fly there to Manila if you needed to. Couldn't fly to any other places from there, but I didn't need to do that. I rented a place in Panglao. It was only 5 minutes from the airport, but I never heard any planes, which is what I appreciated. My retirement life started off just as I envisaged. I met up with other expats and was enjoying everything about my new life. My income was more than enough to do nearly everything I wanted to. I found myself going to really nice resorts once a month, spending a couple of $100s a night, and I'm just living what I imagined my retirement would be. But I'm getting lonely. I was looking for company, and I thought back to the YouTuber I watched who got married to a girl from Leyte and built a house there and had a family. I wasn't looking to have any kids again. That was the furthest away from what I wanted to do. But maybe I could get back in the dating scene. I joined Pina Love dating site, and there were so many local girls, all of them looking so beautiful, all looking for someone, like me, a foreigner. It's incredible how many times I was contacted as soon as I put up my profile, and my first mistake, though, was entertaining girls that were too young for me. I was being contacted by girls in their 20s, and I quickly had to get my head straight and realise that this wasn't in my best interest. Because there were just so many girls getting in touch with me, I could afford to be very picky. So I decided I wouldn't entertain any girls that were younger than 35. I didn't want any girls that had kids already, and that was all I was looking for. That really narrowed down my options. It's quite hard to find a girl at that age that didn't have kids yet, but there were more than you would think, and I had my first date with a girl a week or so later. We didn't really hit it off, which wasn't a problem, because I had another date lined up for the following day. She was stunning, 36, no kids, and worked in the local area. She seemed to have a good job and be very career-orientated. At least that's what she told me. And when I asked why she'd never been married before, she just said she never found the right guy, and she was concentrating on her career. She said she was from a very poor area, and she'd seen other people having kids too soon that would trap them and make their lives more difficult. I thought she sounded really smart, and I asked if she wanted to go on a date again later. We went on a second date later on, and I felt like we were really clicking. We seemed to have the same ideas and the same hopes of what we wanted from life. She gave me more information about herself. She had a lot of brothers and sisters who lived on the island with her mother and father, and she was one of the people who provided most for the family. I thought that what she was saying sounded great. I didn't know yet about the family situation in the Philippines. If only I had. I did have another date lined up with another girl, but again I just didn't really click with her, so I decided to turn off my profile and concentrate on the girl that I had the biggest connection with. I don't want to give her name, but let's just call her Mandy. On our next date, we went to a really great restaurant that served American food the way it should be done. Mahalo. That became one of my regular go-to places to eat. We had a great meal, and afterwards we went to a resort that had chairs on the beach and had some drinks. It's hard to stress just how beautiful the beaches are in the Philippines. I know I hadn't seen beaches in other countries around the world, but when you're watching videos about them, the Philippines seems to be on a different level, even to similar countries in the region. The crystal clear blue ocean, maybe it makes you make decisions that you may later regret. Let's just say I was enjoying Mandy's company, and before I knew it, she'd moved in with me. She didn't work close to where I lived, but it wasn't an issue because my lease was up for renewal. I'd only taken it on short-term basis, so we went to look for somewhere that was closer to her work. I wasn't ready to tell her to stop working. Her salary wasn't bad in comparison to what many people earned, and I felt it gave her some independence to be able to work, and she didn't seem to want to quit either yet. We found a place in Tagbilaran City, and now I was living together with Mandy. It was a shock to the system to be living with someone for the first time in years. I'd been divorced back home, and I never wanted to try even date in America anymore. It felt like a disaster in the making, and I put it off until retirement, until when the time was right. And being in the Philippines, I definitely felt like it was right, and I was moving in the right direction. I felt like one of the unluckiest expats on the island. Here I was with a great girl who had a stable job and who didn't have any kids. What more could anybody ask for? She did tell me that she wanted kids at some point, but I managed to talk her out of that, saying that let's just live our lives together, at least for the time being. I was getting serious with her, and we spent a couple of great months together. She'll get back from work, and we'd go, get something to eat, and I took up hobbies in the day when she was working. Walking, reading. It was probably too hot to walk, but I did it anyway, and I got a bike and just drove around the island and explored. We were at a small resort in Anda, on the other side of the island, on a weekend getaway, and I felt like it was time to take things with Mandy a bit further. I was getting on with her, and she was making my retirement even better. I thought the age gap wasn't too bad, which many people also agreed with me on, and I asked about what she would think of her quitting her job so she could spend more time together with me and maybe travel around the Philippines together. She did seem excited by this prospect, not having to work anymore. I could more than support her. My income was better than I was hoping it was going to be, and I still had money left over at the end of the month, even after going to nice resorts often. It was decided that she would stop working, but the thing we didn't talk about was her need for money. She'd never asked for money from me before. I was paying for everything every time we went out, the rent on the place we lived, and I was putting all the bills, which is what I was expecting to have to do. But I never expected her to want any money from me directly. I just thought anytime she wanted something, she would ask, and if it was reasonable, I would get it. But she said before she needed to stop working, I'd have to be able to give her a certain amount of money every month so that she could still be her own self and not be fully reliant on me to buy everything. I suppose that made sense. I could understand her wanting some level of independence and not feeling that she had to ask me all the time. So we agreed on 20,000 pesos per month. It was slightly less than she used to make from her job, but it was fair and would be able to go around the Philippines without any hindrance of her having a full-time job. I hadn't met her family yet. She'd often go off and visit them and come back and asked if it was time for me to go and visit. We were serious after all. We'd been together nearly 6 months, and Mandy agreed. I never seen that side of the Philippines before, the shanties and the poverty. I mean, I've seen it, but I've never been part of it until that moment. That being said, her family were really friendly. They asked if we were going to get married, and Mandy looked at me with a smile, and I said, maybe soon.
Brothers and sisters were mostly younger than her. Most of them still lived at home, all sharing one room. It was something I'd never seen before, and it did come as a surprise. Before we left, Mandy asked if I could give her family some money. I didn't think, no, definitely not. She'd never asked before for her family, but I also didn't think this would become a big part of our lives. I gave them 10,000 pesos, and we were back off to where we lived. That meeting with the family did change me. I couldn't believe how people lived in such conditions, and that's where Mandy actually came from. It did make me realize perhaps why she was with me. Better opportunities, chance for a better life. But I was with her for a better life, and she gave me more happiness than my old wife did, and I decided that I wanted to get married, and I asked her one weekend when we were at a resort. The contrast between the resort and where she grew up was incredible, and I felt bad spending the amount of money I spent at the resort, knowing how far it would go for some people who struggle so much in the Philippines. To cut a long story short, we got married. That was a process that I don't want to go through again. It took ages to get everything sorted out, but it was fun to have a deeper connection with her, and I hoped it would lead to me getting residence in the Philippines later down the line. That would have been great, to never have to worry about doing a visa again or leaving the country, where I didn't want to. It sounded like it would be a really good thing to do. I'm still hoping for that. When we got married, we had a small party. Her whole family came. I didn't have anyone from my side coming. My kids couldn't make it because they were too busy, and I probably wouldn't have wanted them there anyway, if I'm being honest. It didn't feel different being married, but I think it felt different for Mandy. I think she felt like she was now more emboldened to ask for things, and it was always for the family. We always had family members round to our house. We were always going to visit her family, far more than we used to do before, and in the early stages of being married, I wasn't really having any issues with this. I just chalked it up as being part of life in the Philippines. I think getting married was the biggest mistake. If I'd stayed with Mandy without being married, things may have been easier. But as soon as we got married, she wanted more and more. And it was for her family that she wanted it for. It wasn't for herself. I didn't mind when I was asked once for 10,000 pesos, but then every week you're getting people asking you for money from the family. Her 18-year-old brother wants some new shoes, 2,000 pesos. Sounded like a lot for shoes, but that's what it was. 22-year-old sister wanted me to pay for her job interview in Cebu. Her parents wanted me to fix their roof, and it was never-ending and relentless. I was going with it because I could afford the amount I was giving, but it was eating into my lifestyle. I didn't want to change the way I was living because the girl I married had a family who were taking advantage of me. Were they taking advantage of me, though, or was it just a Filipino thing? Mandy was asking for more as well. She said now we were married, she should get 30,000 pesos a month instead of 20,000. I went along with it and gave it to her, but then she said we needed a car. We didn't need a car. What did we need that for? But she said we needed one, we're married now, and it would look better if we had one. So I bought a car. And all the while I'm thinking that this would die down soon and she'd get it out of her system once or now that she was married. She'd never been married before, and I think because she was married for the first time, she thought she was able to act differently than when she wasn't married, and that was starting to become a problem for me after 3 months of handing over money to random family members that I'd never met before. I couldn't believe what was going on, and I had to finally talk to Mandy and say, I'm not happy for this to continue. I'm not here to provide for your family. I'm afraid that's just not going to happen or continue. I can afford to look after us, and I can very occasionally give money to certain family members when it's an actual real-life emergency, and only I will determine what an emergency is. She said she understood, but whether she did or not, I will never know. But it wasn't stopping. It was always someone getting in touch wanting something, and I told Mandy, if someone gets in touch with you asking for money, don't even ask me. But she still continued to ask me every time someone got in touch with her. And I was starting to get really upset. We'd only been married for 6 months at this point, and I felt like it was a mistake. I loved Mandy and spending time with her, and I wanted to be with her. I saw myself being with her indefinitely. It's not that I didn't like her family. They were friendly people, always respectful towards me. But was it really respectful because the requests for money never seemed to stop? Time was going on, and I was not enjoying myself anymore. We didn't go to resorts anymore for special weekends away. I was just too angry with the fact that Mandy was continuing to let her family walk all over me. And after being married for nearly a year, I told her, you're going to have to make a choice. You can have your 30,000 pesos a month, but anything your family wants has to come out of that. If you ask me for money again, I'm not going to be able to do it anymore. I'm simply not. I've moved to the Philippines to retire. I've married to you and I love you, but your family are really not my problem. And that's when she looked at me, with a strange look on her face, like, you married me, that means you married my family. She didn't quite put it like that, but that's what she was trying to say to me. And then it dawned on me that perhaps this was expected in the culture of the Philippines. I'd spoken to other expats who had been married to Filipinas, but we'd never talked much in detail about things like this. Had I not done enough research? That could be the problem. The next time I was out with a friend of mine, I didn't meet up with him often, but he was married to a Filipina, and I asked if he had the same problem with her family, and he said yes, but he just learned to live with it and accept that's part of the life in the Philippines, especially if you marry a province girl. I asked him if it didn't bother him. He told me it bothered him greatly, but he's learned to accept it. He also has a child with his wife, and built a house, so he's probably more trapped than I was, at least at this point, and I asked him what he did about it. He looked and said he moved to the Philippines, get in a relationship with the same girl, but I wouldn't have a child and wouldn't get married, and the first request of money from the family member, I'd be gone. And I'd make it clear to her that that's what my intentions were, and she'd be the one who would have to accept it or not. That's what he said he would do again if he had his chance. What was I to do? I could afford the money I was being asked for, but it felt like I was being taken advantage of. I had another talk with Mandy and told her how it was nothing like where I came from. I know I was living in the Philippines, but you're married to me, and I'm not from the Philippines, so you have to give some ground as well. I didn't want to separate from her. I knew how difficult divorce was in the Philippines, and I loved being with her. And I honestly feel like she loved being with me as well. But her family came first, and that was clear, and I needed to talk to her and come to some sort of agreement where I wouldn't be asked for random amounts of money ever again. I think Mandy could see I was serious, and she said, how about you give me 50,000 pesos a month, and then any time my family asks for money, I will give it to them. I just said okay. I didn't like it, but I accepted it, and it works for us. That is still the arrangement we have. I really don't like it, and I'm being honest when I say I don't like it, and every time I hand over the money, I feel like I'm being taken for a ride. But aside from that, every other part of the month is great. We did end up having a kid, not very long ago. I didn't want one, but it happened, and I'm going to be one of those old dads. I wonder if we're living in the best place for my son to grow up. I don't want to return to the States, and when he finishes university, I'll be well into my 70s if I live that long. I'm just lucky that the income I have, and even after giving money to her family, the 50,000 a month, I still have more than enough for us to have a great life. I had no idea I was marrying her family as well. I think we came to a fair arrangement, albeit one that I really don't like, but I've lived with it, and now we have a son. Mandy does see the benefit of keeping the money for him and his future. To her credit, she has never asked for more than the 50,000 pesos, and I know she gives most of it to her family, and I just have to accept that. I'll leave it there now. Just one thing that I wanted to say to any guys who want to have a Filipina girlfriend or wife. Know their family, and know that if you marry her, you've got the family as baggage. I nearly let it end my marriage, but I grit my teeth every time I hand over the money, because the alternative is worse, and I have accepted that. But this is a warning. Get married in the Philippines, and you're marrying her family as well. You have been warned.
I used to travel a lot for business. 20 years of flying around the country, attending business meetings and going to events meant I was very used to flying, and it didn't faze me. Flying to the Philippines, a country I'd never been before, that was different, and it was really exciting. I was going to the Philippines to look at the possibility of retiring there, as well as to have a great vacation. Cebu in particularly. I'd heard lots of amazing things about it, and the thought of being able to go and see it for myself meant I was pretty excited. I was 48, not too far away from retirement, and I got to the point where I was starting to feel like I'd had enough of working. My kids had already left home, living their own lives. I'd been divorced a few years before, and there was nothing holding me there anymore. I kept thinking about doing something different and having a change of pace and scenery, and that's how I found myself sitting on the plane to Manila. I'd been to Thailand in the past, and I knew a few people retired there, and that was always somewhere I was interested to go. But from what I understood about the Philippines, there were a lot more things that reminded you of America there, a lot more so than Thailand. And to have some of the trappings of home, that was something I was interested in. I wasn't staying in Manila for long. I had a connecting flight booked to Cebu a few hours after landing. But by the time I touched down in Manila, I was all ready to stop flying. It's a long way to get there, and those 3 hours waiting on the ground for the plane to Cebu, they seemed to last for an eternity. When I finally did get to Cebu, and I immediately loved it. It felt like a tropical paradise. A colleague of mine talked about going there years ago, saying how much he liked it. About the beaches, the people, the slower pace of life. Everything he described was just I imagined it. And that's what it was like. There was nothing out of the ordinary. It was just perfect. The heat hits you. Very different to the weather I left back at home. And the taxi ride from the airport was interesting. Seeing lots of things for the first time. It was a great experience. And there was already this feeling I had a connection to the Philippines, even though I'd only just left the airport. The hotel was quite close to the centre of the city, walking distance to many of the most famous places. I was staying there only a while, before moving to a resort a bit out of the main area, next to a beach. I only had one intention when I was there, to relax, explore, and try out some of the local dishes, and just enjoy myself, while at the same time thinking about what it would feel like to live there permanently. I did some snorkeling at one point. The waters were so clear you could hardly believe just how perfect everything seemed to be. I'm still exploring the city at this point. That was an eye-opening experience along Colon Street, and I was looking forward to going for a more relaxing time in a few days. I found some of the food in the Philippines to be good. Lechon, that's delicious, and as a big seafood lover, the selection of seafood was also next level. But some of the local style dishes I had a hard time enjoying. Plenty of restaurants that sold the food I was more used to, and the prices, although a lot more expensive than local Filipino food, was slightly cheaper than you would pay at home for something similar. A few days later, I moved to the hotel by the beach. A resort-style hotel, breakfast included, an amazing swimming pool, friendly staff. It was just as good as similar hotels back at home. 5-star luxury. But it did cost money, obviously, and it wasn't cheap. It was $250 a night, and in the Philippines, some people don't earn that in a month. But it was worth it for me. I'm on vacation, and I'm enjoying myself, so there's nothing wrong with splurging from time to time. It was from this hotel that I would leave to go on a snorkeling trip, or go sit down at a beachside cafe, and in the evenings I'd go for a walk along the beach. It was during one of those evening walks on the beach that I started speaking to a girl who was walking in the other direction. She was walking with 2 of her friends, but I just kind of caught eyes with her and started talking. I'd spoken to lots of people during my walks around. Speaking to a girl or even a guy, there's nothing strange about that. I'm a very outgoing sort of person, and that's just who I am. But she's not only being polite and pretending like I wanted directions to somewhere. She's also smiling, offers to show me. Really, I thought going above and beyond to help me. I really appreciated that. She was a lot younger than me. I'd found out not long later she was 23, but she had a maturity about her that made her look and act like she was 10 years older. It was a funny situation. I'm speaking to her, asking the directions to a nice restaurant, and her friends are giggling. And they both sort of indicate something to her, and they walk off, leaving her alone with me. She says that she'd take me to the restaurant and show me. I thought that was very kind of her, and as we're walking along the beach, she's talking to me and chatting about all kinds of things. And in the moment, I start to feel young again. I've got a new lease on life. And when we get to the restaurant, she asks if I want any company. That sounded better than anything I could have expected, and we both went into the restaurant and sat down at a table overlooking the beach. And before that, not long ago, I was walking on the beach by myself, completely minding my own business. Saw her, started to talk. Now somehow I'm sitting in a restaurant with her, and we're clinking glasses in a cheers. That's when it all began. She started telling me about herself. She came from not too far away from where we were. She worked at a restaurant not far away. As was common with many people that I met, she had the burden of helping her family, if ever they were struggling. She was so polite and seemed very kind, and when I started talking about myself, she seemed to want to know more. She wanted to know exactly what it was like at home in America, having someone show such interest in your life. It really gives you good feelings, and that's undeniable. I felt like she was pursuing me in that moment, not the other way around. And to have someone show that kind of interest in you, and the person who's showing that interest in you is the type of girl that you'd only usually speak to in your dreams. It does send your head swirling. It makes you think things that, if you weren't in the position, you would never think or dream about. I didn't even want to go to that restaurant. It was just an excuse to strike up a conversation that I expected to last 5 minutes at the most. But after being in the restaurant for 3 hours, I think it's time to say goodbye and try to get these crazy feelings out of my head before I allow them to take hold. I thanked her for showing me where the restaurant was and having a nice meal with me, and I was going to leave it at that. Then she asked for my number. I'd got a local number as soon as I arrived, and as soon as I had that number, I knew that I would be able to speak to people locally. And seeing as though she asked for my number, I wasn't about to not give it to her. I gave her my number, and then she puts it in her phone and calls me immediately. Now I have her number, and I added it as a contact. She left smiling, and I'm thinking did that just happen? But I knew I wouldn't call her. I didn't expect her to call me either. But she did, the following day, in the morning when I was down having breakfast. She just said she had a great time the night before, and I could hear chuckling sounds very faintly, like her friends were listening in, telling her what to say. But the fact she called me, I thought that was kind of her. I told her I had a good time, and I was about to hang up, but she said, "Are you doing anything later? I'd love to meet up with you again." I knew I needed to be careful. An older Western guy, young Filipina local girl. I'd heard stories, but against my better judgment, I told her I'd be delighted to see her that evening, and she said she would come and meet me at a hotel, at my hotel, then we could go somewhere together. I didn't think anything about it the rest of the day, but at the allotted time, she showed up. Only this time, she's really made herself look beautiful. She's done her hair, perfect setting, makeup, gone the whole 9 yards. And I felt very underdressed in an old shirt and some shorts, and I even asked her if I should go and change, but she told me not to bother. That's when she grabbed hold of my hand and led me out of the hotel. "Don't let yourself get carried away," I kept saying. "Don't let yourself get carried away." After we left the hotel, we got a taxi to the area that I stayed in when I first arrived in Cebu, the main city, and she took me to a great restaurant that served lechon. I guess she remembered me talking about how much I liked it the previous day. Just telling me all about her life. I'm ordering drinks as well, and I'm just taking things as they come. I'm not going in with any expectations. I'm not planning for anything to happen. If anything, I'm trying to avoid something happening. But if they did, I would allow it to. That's the reason I gave to myself, expecting that things would never get too far. But after we went to the restaurant, she took me to a club. I felt very out of place there. Most of the people were a lot younger than me, But she just kept saying, anyone can come here. Age is just a number. People are just people. If someone's 20 and someone's 60, it doesn't matter. They're still allowed to enjoy themselves. And you are allowed to be happy. I took what she said to heart and thought I might as well just enjoy it. The loud music in the club and the fact it was packed, it was a little out of my comfort zone, but she seemed to be really enjoying it. She started dancing with me, and it was fun, just like I was in my 20s again. It was getting quite late, and she whispered something in my ear. I like you, she said. I've never met a man like you before. Shall we go back to your hotel? What was I meant to say? I could say no and run away and not lose myself in this madness. I could say, definitely, let's go back to the hotel, and I could enjoy myself, maybe more than I've ever enjoyed myself before, and then somehow tell myself, I'm never going to do that again. Or I could say yes, let's go back to the hotel, and then every decision I made moving forward from then would make me more close to her. I chose the latter. It's as though it chose me. I couldn't help it. And when she asked me if I wanted to go to the hotel, my brain is screaming at me, don't do it, don't do it. It's relentless. But I completely ignored that and just convinced myself that it doesn't have to turn out badly. It could be a one-off. But I should have known myself well enough to know that once something like that takes hold, letting go is difficult. We started spending more time together after that, and within a few weeks there was nothing that I cared about more than her. She became my life, and I thought that I became her life. She convinced me that age difference wasn't a problem. She convinced me that we went well together, and she convinced me that I wasn't doing anything wrong. She convinced me. And when you've got a beautiful girl like that convincing you, you start to change. You start to think, maybe she is one of the real ones, and maybe she really does see something in me. I'd ask her, when we met, if she had any children, and she said she didn't. No, sir, she said, no children. Things would have been different if she had had children. As soon as she told me she didn't, though, I asked her again when I'm starting to get serious with her, and she confirmed she didn't. But as soon as she confirmed she didn't, I had a small wave of relief wash over me. I'd already had 2 kids who were grown up, and I felt like that was enough. The idea of starting over with young kids at my age would have been a complete deal breaker. But her answer removed any potential complication that could rear its ugly head at some point in the future. It was only a week after meeting her that she's staying with me at my hotel. She keeps introducing me to people as her boyfriend. She keeps calling herself my girlfriend, and every time she says that, she smiles and seems to be proud. Everything she did in a way, but I was powerless to stop. I couldn't do anything about the feelings I was having for her, and I was falling further and further under her spell. When my initial vacation time was nearing its end, I didn't want to leave. I still had a year's work left, but I came up with an excuse that I had to extend my time for a few weeks, and because I'd worked at the company for so long, they allowed me to, and I extended my stay for another 2 weeks. The thought of leaving became unbearable, and during those weeks, I feel like our relationship solidified. She's everything any man would want, and I suppose if you have to think honestly about it, is she just playing this part? A few days before I was due to leave, we were walking hand in hand on the beach, and she turned to me and told me she loved me. I wasn't expecting that. I felt more of an infatuation, but because she said it, I felt like I had to, and I told her that I loved her as well. She kept saying how fortunate she was to have met me, how she feels her life is going to be better, how she feels like she's got someone in her life who can look after her, but who she can also look after. When she starts talking about this love she felt, you could see it seemed real. Her eyes started to well up with tears, and she started talking about not wanting me to go. I told her I was a year away from retirement. I had to go back, no matter what. But it wasn't that long. She just kept telling me how much she loved me and how much she didn't want me to go, and that made it even more difficult. I knew that there was no point trying to get her to go to America. By the time her visa would be arranged, I'd already be retired, and we sat down and talked the following day about our plans for the future. We could keep in touch every single day, and in a year's time, I could come back after retiring and we could be together. She kept saying how much she liked the sound of that, but she also kept saying she didn't believe I would go back. Every time I promised I would, she looked at me and said, "No, you won't. I don't believe you." "What about if we get married?" she said. "I always wanted to get married, and I love you so much. I don't want to get married to anyone else." "If we get married, then it won't be so bad if we have to spend 1 year apart." And there I was, seriously considering getting married after knowing her for such a short amount of time. But the way she said it, the reasoning behind it, it all made sense to me, and I thought, why not? It only took me 5 minutes of thinking after she brought it up, and I agreed to marry her. She was delighted. I didn't know how to do that in the Philippines, but we did get married, although I had to extend my stay again while we did that. Luckily, my work understood, and I just told them I would take no vacation days until I finally retired, and I'm very thankful that they agreed. We got married in Cebu. It took a while to get all the paperwork, trips to government offices. I even met up with her family, all of them. They were all equally as nice as her, welcoming me with open arms, and they seemed to be happy for her. It was not one of those situations where you get to the family's house and you're expected to pay any money or give them anything. None of that. She was just, I think, trying to make it like I would want it to be. But it was great after we got married. A few days later, though, I had to leave, and I wouldn't see her again for what would be about 11 months. Leaving was awful. She cried, I cried. She hugged me tighter than she'd ever hugged me before, and just said, "I will see you soon." Somehow the fact that we were married, that made me feel like I will definitely see her again, and I think she felt the same about that. But I said goodbye to her and flew from Cebu to Manila and then straight back home with one stop. As soon as I got home, I called her, and that became a constant, speaking to her every day with video calls, and it was clear that she was with her family all the time. Every day that we spoke, on video, I can see the family in the background. I can see where she is, and it's just a countdown until I can be there with her. When I tell friends about the position I found myself in, initially they were very judgmental. I suppose you'd expect them to be. But when I told them that she was the one who seemed to be interested to start with, she was the one who suggested these things, plus I need to mention at this point I have not sent or given her or her family even 1 cent. She told me she didn't expect me to send any money when I was in America. She knew that if I had to send money, I may feel uncomfortable about that. It was about a week since I'd been back, and I'm video calling her, and I could see some damage in the family's house. She pointed it out on video. There had been a big storm, and because the house wasn't built on a very strong foundation, one of the walls had blown down. They'd managed to fix it together the best they could, but it was one of those bodge jobs that would have to do. And because that was being fixed when I called her, she walked out into the local area and showed me around. I'd already met her family, I'd already been there, but I'd never actually looked there, if that makes sense. I was too busy speaking to her family, understanding how things work, everything like that, to actually take in what it was like there. But the more she showed me, the more beautiful I felt the place was. I offered to help fix the house for her family, but she said, "Don't worry about it, it's already been done." But that was the first time I started to think like where she was from, that environment, that would be the perfect place to live in retirement. It wasn't too far away from the hotel I stayed at, probably a 10-minute drive, so that could be a big positive. I had an idea in my mind that building a house there could be our future. I'd reasoned, and although I knew lots of people built houses and ended up having problems with their partners, I'd also seen many people who had built houses who were there years and years later. I kept thinking about it and weighing up the pros and cons, and one day, when I was feeling very happy when we spoke, I said to her, "How about we build a house close to there?" Her eyes lit up. Even though we were speaking on video, I could tell how excited she was at the prospect. But even then, she said that sounds great, but we should wait for you to come back. I thought the fact that she was saying things like that, and she'd never asked me for anything, meant that I could trust her even more. And I told her by the time I get back, it could already be built. Just video call me and let me see. See if I like the location of the land. See if I like the plans for the house. And if that's good enough, that's good. As soon as I said that, she didn't try to say otherwise, and she said she would look into that as quickly as possible. She seemed to be a little bit overwhelmed when I told that to her, and from the bit of research I'd done, All I said was, make sure you use a reputable builder. She said she would, and I left it with her. I began sending money, initially for a plot of land, then for materials and labour. She managed everything on the ground, and now we were speaking every day for multiple hours, and I'm watching the progress. The time difference, as you'd expect, caused that to be quite difficult. I'm not sleeping properly just so I can speak with her. When the time comes to choose the interior decoration, she's video calling with me. When she's in the shop, everything she's trying to do involves me every step of the way, and I really appreciated her because of that. I had enough money so that building this house wouldn't affect my retirement either way. But still, when it was ready up to a standard that I was happy with, I'd spent about $80,000. And from the looks of it at least, when I was speaking with her on video, the house looked everything as good as the plans that were drawn up in the early stage. A reputable builder was used, but it did cost more than someone who could just build any sort of house. But I thought it was worth it in order to make sure we had a good quality construction. I can remember the day I retired, going into work for the last time. I'd given them decades, and they gave me a send-off, a bit of a party. But just like that, I didn't have to work anymore, and I was going to be moving to the Philippines very soon to be with the love of my life. If I wasn't speaking to her, I was thinking about her. She became my world. I would have done anything for her, and I couldn't wait to get back to the Philippines to be with her and live in our house together. I kept my house in America, and my investments were more than adequate to live a great life in the Philippines with my beautiful wife. I didn't take much with me. Everything could be bought in the Philippines, and I just thought I would get new things when I got there. New things for a new life. Getting on the plane that time was different to the time before. Knowing what to expect, knowing someone's waiting for you. It really is a great experience when you're following your dreams, the dreams that you thought about, and the fact they're actually coming true. I arrived in Manila, only this time I didn't go immediately to Cebu. I stayed a few days there because I hadn't seen it on my last trip, and I was thinking about looking around and seeing if we could maybe buy a small condo there, spend most of our time in our house in Cebu. If we wanted a change of scenery, we could go to the condo in Manila. I looked at some available units, and that was something I was going to talk to her about when I saw her. When I landed in Cebu, the heat was just as I remembered, but this time it felt welcoming. She was meeting me at the airport, and when I saw her and she ran over to me and jumped on me and gave me a hug, saying how happy she was, that I was there, how much I'm going to like the house, how she can't wait to start living with me, and I was understandably extremely happy to see her after all that time. The taxi ride was different this time. We weren't going to a hotel, we were going home, our home, and that was a strange experience, but one that I was enjoying. It took 30 to 40 minutes, maybe slightly longer, to get to the house. We got out of the taxi, I got my bag, and the taxi driver drove off. At this point, there is no indication that anything other than what I thought was happening was happening. Apart from the look on her face started to change from a look of joy and happiness as we set off in the taxi, to a look that starts to get more serious and like she's got something on her mind that she's worried about. I wasn't thinking anything. But when we got out of the taxi, she looked at me in a way like I'd never seen her look before, and she said, "I've got something to tell you. I'm really sorry I didn't tell you before. I still love you the same, everything is just the same, I still want a life with you, but I need to tell you something." My mind starts racing, thinking what does she want to tell me? But I didn't need to wait too long. "I've got 2 kids, she said, and they're in the house now with my mom." When she told me, her face turned pale. She glanced at me and then to the door. My son is 5 and my daughter is 3. Talk about having your world turned upside down. The retirement that I had envisaged with her, in this house that I had built for her and us to live in, everything was built on a lie. I couldn't believe it when those words came out of her mouth. She could tell I was shocked. She could tell that I didn't like what I heard, and she kept saying, "Nothing will change, nothing will change, nothing will change. I can promise you nothing will change." I thought back to the time I asked her if she had kids, and I said to her, "You told me you didn't have kids. You said you didn't have kids. I asked you." "I know," she said. She was crying a lot at this point. "I know I didn't tell you, but I didn't think I would get this far. I didn't think I would love you. I was afraid to tell you." I was starting to feel angry. and I shouted at her. Afraid of what? Afraid I wouldn't marry you if I knew the truth? She was crying even more and she nodded. She was unable to speak because she was so visibly upset. And then I pointed at the house. What about this? You let me send $80,000 to build this house? This house that was meant for me and you? You let me do that knowing that I would arrive and find out the truth? You let me pay for this? Her crying intensified even more, and she kept saying she didn't think I would mind, that she still loved me and nothing would change. She told me that she planned to tell me before we started building the house, but she loved me so much that she wanted to make sure I would come back and be with her. She then said that she thought I could accept them, and accept they would be part of our lives. And then she said, we can go away regularly, and my mom can help look after them. We can have a lot of time together, just me and you. I stood there completely taken aback. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. But here was a girl who, apart from the fact she'd lied to me about not having kids, she hadn't done anything else that perhaps would indicate there was something going on. But this was a big lie. She could see I was really angry and upset, and she wrapped her arms around me. She was begging, please, I love you, please stay. I promised you that I didn't lie about anything else. I was so angry and let down, and I felt broken, but I had two choices. Walk away right there and then and forget it, an $80,000 loss and a lot of heartbreak, or stay there and play things by ear and see how things turned out. If she starts doing things that I don't like, if she does anything else like this, then I can go later and it wouldn't have cost me anything really. If she starts asking for extra money or anything, if she starts asking for anything other than the financial support that I give her regularly to take care of her kids, then I can reevaluate. While I'm thinking, she's still pleading with me, and I sort of breathe out and calm down a bit, and I say, can you promise me there are no other secrets? She looked at me dead in the eye and promised, and I told her if I found out anything else, I'm gone. With that, she told me she loved me again, and she picked up my bag and took it inside the house and went to put it in the bedroom. When I walked through the door and her kids were there on the couch, they looked at me, and her mom looked at me. I think her mom knew that she hadn't told me about them, but when I saw them there, I wasn't as angry anymore. If this is the only thing she kept from me, perhaps it's not really so bad. The house was everything I expected it to be. Our bedroom was nice, there was a bedroom set up for the kids, and we had a spare bedroom. Nice bathroom, nice kitchen. It was a really nice house, and a beautiful beach was a 5-minute walk away. I was in a great place with a great girl, and yes, she had kids, and I just tried to overlook that fact. That was 7 years ago, and we are still living together. The only money she gets is a monthly allowance that she can use for anything she wants to use it for. Part of her monthly allowance has to be spent on anything I personally wouldn't want to pay for. If she wants to help with her family with something, it has to come out of her allowance. If she wants to buy something for her kids, she has to use her allowance. And true to her word, we go to places all the time and her kids stay with her mom. There will come a point over the next 10 years when I get too old to do things, and she has never done anything other than lie to me about having kids to indicate that she's not who she says she is. I'm going to be 60 soon, and she's a lot younger than me, but I leave it up to you to decide. When something eventually happens to me, everything I have will be split 3 ways between my 2 kids and her, and she knows that. She's still more than she'd ever have seen otherwise, and I think that's fair because it's just the way it is. I was very close to turning around and running away when I found out about those kids, but I've grown to get to know them, and they're just like any other kids, want to enjoy their life and have a good time. And I suppose she did lie to me, but she did it for her kids, and aside from that, she is still a great wife. I couldn't dream of a better one, and things are working, but I still think from time to time if I did the right thing. That's the thing. If she didn't have kids, she wouldn't have done the things she did with me. She wouldn't be with me if she didn't have kids, because she'd be free to chase her other dreams. And life is as good as we make it. I know many people will listen to this and think I'm crazy for accepting that. I think I'm crazy sometimes, but what else could I do?